Hello everyone, I am the Creep's Cabin. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I don't remember much about the pub itself. Not the name, not the layout, not even the furniture. I was young when my grandparents ran it, but the story stuck. I suppose that's how memories work sometimes. You forget the wallpaper and the smell of the kitchen, but the way your stomach twisted when someone whispered about the house, that stays. Especially when you hear it again years later, from someone who wasn't even around the first time. My grandparents lived in the house attached to the pub. It was an old building. Stone walls that looked thick and damp year-round. Wood everywhere, floors, stairs, window frames, that seemed to creak even when no one was touching it. A few steps led from the pub into the house, and once you crossed that doorway, it was like walking into a different time. The air changed. Colder, heavier, even in the summer. My grandmother was the first one to say anything about it. I remember her telling me when I was older, probably in my teens, that she always felt off in the house. But at the time they bought it, they didn't think too much of it. They had kids to raise and a business to run. A lot of long nights and early mornings. Not much room for being scared of noises. Still, she never liked being alone in there after dark. And she never went into certain rooms without switching on a light first, even in the middle of the day. The first real thing that happened to her wasn't even scary, just strange. She'd gone to bed early with the kids. My grandfather was still downstairs, locking up and wiping down the bar like he always did. She heard a loud clatter from the kitchen at the back of the house. Dishes shifting, maybe something heavy falling. She assumed he was cleaning up after dinner or putting something away. It didn't seem like a big deal. But when she asked him the next morning what had fallen, he just looked at her. He said he never went near the kitchen. Came up the stairs after locking the bar. Didn't even take his shoes off until he was in the bedroom. That was the first time she felt something wasn't right. She didn't make a scene about it. My grandmother wasn't like that. She kept it quiet, probably told herself it was nothing. Maybe a stack of pans had shifted on its own, or a rat had knocked something off a shelf. It's an old house, she probably thought. Old houses make noises. That's what everyone says. That's what people always say. But after that night, she said she stopped feeling comfortable in the kitchen when she was alone. She would start doing all the prep work early, before dark, just to get out of there faster. Sometimes she'd even drag one of the kids in with her, just to have someone nearby. My uncle was one of those kids. He must have been 6 or 7 back then. He didn't understand anything about the business, but he liked being close to his parents. One night, he told them he saw someone at the top of the stairs. He didn't cry or act scared. He just said it like he noticed a cat or a shadow. My grandmother didn't say much about it at the time, but years later, she told me it chilled her. He wasn't the kind of kid to make things up. He didn't even seem to know it was strange. He said it was just a man, standing there, watching. Again, my grandfather tried to brush it off. Probably a dream. Maybe he woke up and was still half asleep. Kids see things sometimes. And he didn't want to go down the road of thinking the place was wrong. They were tied into a mortgage. Their savings were in the pub. They had regulars. If something was off in that house, what were they going to do about it? But that wasn't the end of it. Other people started noticing things too. It wasn't always something big, more like a string of little things that didn't feel right. Staff members quitting for vague reasons. New bartenders not lasting more than a few weeks. One guy said he didn't like being in the bar alone at night. He always left before closing time, even if it meant taking a pay cut. A cleaner said she hated doing the back hallway, the one that led from the kitchen into the house. Said it felt like someone was watching her. Another one refused to come back after her first day, though she never explained why. Even deliveries started getting weird. A driver once left crates of bottled beer outside because he didn't want to come in. He didn't say anything, but he looked pale. My grandmother asked if something was wrong, and he just said he didn't like the way the place felt. She offered him tea, but he declined and left quickly. The next delivery came from a different driver. These things kept piling up. One of my mom's cousins stayed with them for a few weeks one summer, back when she was a teenager. She was from out of town, didn't know any of the stories. She stayed in the guest room that faced the back field, the one closest to the trees. The first night she was fine. The second night, she asked if she could sleep on the couch in the living room. said the room was too cold. My grandmother gave her an extra blanket and told her to give it another try. The third night, the girl didn't sleep at all. She came down at 6 in the morning with her bags packed and asked if someone could take her to the train station. She never said why. She barely said goodbye. After a few years, my grandparents sold the place. They didn't give a real reason, just said they wanted a change. Said they were getting tired of running a bar, that it was time to move on. But my grandmother told me years later it was the house. She said she was tired of never sleeping properly, tired of locking doors that weren't supposed to be unlocked, of hearing footsteps above her when she was downstairs alone. She said it got to a point where she wouldn't even go to the toilet without leaving the door open. After they sold it, the place passed through a few more hands. No one seemed to keep it for very long. A couple tried to renovate the upstairs flat and turn it into a rental, but they left after less than a year. Said the wiring was bad, the plumbing was worse, and the place was just too much work. Another family moved in, ran the pub for a while, and then disappeared. No big goodbye party, no notice in the window. Just gone. I didn't think much about the place until recently, when my mom went back to visit it. She hadn't been in years. She said she was curious, wanted to see if it had changed. I went with her. It looked the same. The paint was a little fresher, and they'd put up a few signs trying to make it look more modern. But the bones were the same. That thick stone, that narrow entryway into the house, that dark window at the top of the stairs. We talked to the owner, a woman in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. She was nice enough, said business wasn't bad, but she struggled to keep staff. She didn't go into detail, just said people got uneasy, especially at night. A few refused to close alone. One girl came in to open one morning and quit by lunchtime, just walked out. When we asked about the house, the woman laughed, said she didn't live there, said she tried, but it didn't feel right. Her words, didn't feel right. She rented a flat in town instead. Still paid the mortgage on the place, still kept the lights on, but refused to sleep in it. My mom didn't say much on the way back. She kept looking out the window, quiet. When we got home, she told me something I hadn't heard before. She said that when she was young, still living in the house with my grandparents, she used to sleep with a blanket stuffed against the door. Not because she was cold, because she didn't want it to open. She said once, she woke up to find it moved, pushed aside. No one ever admitted to opening it. She was sure no one else would have come in. My grandmother said she never went into the kids' rooms after they were asleep. And my grandfather was always last to bed, too tired to bother anyone. She said after that, she stopped sleeping properly. She started putting a chair in front of the door, just to be sure. And even then, she sometimes woke up with the feeling that someone had been in the room. Not that she saw anything, just that feeling, like the air was wrong. Like someone had been breathing in it before her. I don't know what it all means. I've thought about it a lot. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that. I never have. But there's something about that house that doesn't sit right. I've been in plenty of old houses. They creak, they settle, they make noise. That's normal. But this was different. Everyone who lived there came away with the same unease. People who didn't know each other. People who had no reason to lie. They all said the same things. It felt wrong. They couldn't sleep. They didn't like the stairs or the back hallway. No one kept the place long. And it wasn't because of money or location or upkeep. They just couldn't stay. I've looked the place up since. It's still on the market every few years. Someone buys it, tries to run it, then sells it off again. The reviews online are strange. Some people say it's cozy and charming. Others mention how quiet it gets at night, how you can hear every sound. One reviewer said they left after their second pint because the atmosphere felt off. That was their word. Off. Sometimes I think about going back, just to see if I imagined it all. But I know I didn't. Too many people have felt the same thing. And the truth is, I don't want to know. I don't want to walk back through that narrow door, or stand on those stairs, or look out that window at the back field. Some places aren't meant to be figured out. Some places just sit heavy on the land, and you either live with it or you don't. We didn't. It's strange. It's one of those things that, if I didn't experience it myself, I'd probably think I was just imagining it. But no, it happened. And if I had to swear in a court of law to the legitimacy of what I'm about to tell you, I would. because I swear on everything that what I experienced that day was real. I was 10 years old, maybe 11 at the time. My cat, Sabbath, was my best friend. He was this big, fat, black cat, huge, soft, and impossibly loving. He was always there. He had this gentle way about him, like he knew how much I needed him, how much we needed each other. I'd always been the kind of kid who didn't really get along with other kids. Too shy, too awkward, and a bit of a loner, but Sabbath never judged me. He was always there to curl up on my bed, to purr, to nudge me with his head when I was upset, or to roll over and let me scratch his belly like I was the only one in the world who mattered to him. He never once scratched me, never once bit me, even when I would push him a little too much. He was as gentle as a cloud, but like all living things, his time came. He had become very sick, extremely diabetic, and my mom couldn't afford the expensive treatments he needed to survive. I didn't really understand the details of it at the time, just that Sabbath was sick, and then one day he was gone. I didn't get to say goodbye. I couldn't handle it. I remember my mom telling me what had happened, and I just lost it. My whole world seemed to come to a screeching halt, like a car slamming into a brick wall. That cat was everything to me, and I didn't even have the chance to say goodbye. I regretted that for a long time, too long. Weeks passed, and I tried to push it to the back of my mind, but there were nights when I just lay in bed, thinking about Sabbath, thinking about how much I missed him. Sometimes I could almost feel him beside me on the bed, as if he was still there, still sleeping beside me, purring away like nothing had changed. I told myself I was just imagining it, but the feeling didn't go away. It was so strong, so vivid. It felt real. I would even reach down to the side of the bed sometimes, half expecting to feel his warm, soft fur beneath my hand. But it was always empty. One evening, a few weeks after his death, something odd happened. I was in my room, sitting on my bed, probably watching TV or playing video games. It was one of those late afternoons, just before the sun really started to set, casting a warm glow across the room. The kind of evening where everything feels peaceful, still, almost like the world is holding its breath. I had a new toy that I'd just started playing with, a little laser pointer. You know the kind, the ones you use to entertain cats, to make them chase the little red dot. I'd left it on my desk at the foot of the bed, right next to my computer. I wasn't thinking about it at all, to be honest. My mind was somewhere else. But then, out of nowhere, the laser pointer just flickered. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a quick flash of light, like it was trying to turn on, but it couldn't quite get there. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming the batteries were dying or something. But then it happened again, only this time, the flicker was more pronounced, more deliberate. I sat up, still not sure what to think. It was strange, but I didn't feel scared, just confused. I stared at the laser pointer for a while, my gaze fixed on it. It stopped flickering as soon as I moved, almost as if it had sensed my attention. I almost laughed at myself for being so paranoid, but something in the pit of my stomach told me this wasn't a simple glitch. I didn't know why, but I felt this pull like something was about to happen. And then, just as I was about to dismiss it as a random malfunction, it flickered again. Exactly the same way it had before. The air in the room suddenly felt charged thick, like a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. My heart beat a little faster, and I found myself staring at the laser pointer, almost hypnotized by the flickering light. This was more than a coincidence. I didn't know why, but I had this feeling deep inside me that this was significant. I don't know why I did it, but I asked aloud, "Are you trying to talk to me?" The words came out before I even had a chance to think about them. It was like they just slipped out of my mouth on their own, and I couldn't stop them. To my utter shock, the light flickered once. I froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What the hell? I swallowed hard, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had suddenly settled over me. It had to be a fluke. It had to be a coincidence. But then I asked again, "Are you a ghost?" The moment the words left my lips, the laser pointer blinked again. Once. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't normal. It couldn't be. I tried to convince myself I was just imagining things, that I was tired, that I was still grieving, and my mind was just playing tricks on me. But the more I stared at the laser pointer, the more real it seemed. The more it felt like something was actually there. Something was trying to communicate with me. Without thinking, I asked, "Are you going to hurt me?" The pointer blinked twice. I was frozen. The air felt colder, and my breath came out in shallow, quick gasps. This was insane. This couldn't be happening. But then, something in my mind clicked. I thought of Sabbath. I thought of how much I missed him, how he had been with me for so long, how he had never once left my side. I couldn't help it. I asked the question that had been sitting at the back of my mind since the moment I first saw the flicker. "Is it you, Sabbath?" I whispered. The laser blinked once. Just one blink. And in that moment, all the weight of everything hit me. I was crying, tears streaming down my face, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just some malfunction. It wasn't a coincidence. Somehow, someway, it felt like Sabbath was trying to reach me from beyond, trying to let me know that he was still there, that he hadn't forgotten about me. And even though I didn't get to say goodbye, somehow, this felt like a second chance. It felt like he was saying, "I'm okay. You didn't abandon me. I'm still here." For the next half hour, I sat there, asking questions, not really expecting answers, but hoping for some kind of connection. I'm not sure what I asked exactly. I don't remember all the questions, only that I felt like I was talking to Sabbath in a way that I never had before. And after all those questions, after everything that had happened, I finally gathered the courage to pick up the laser pointer and check it out. The batteries were dead. That hit me harder than anything. I didn't understand how, but I knew. I knew this wasn't just some random glitch. There was no way that could have happened by chance. There was no explanation that made sense. I didn't believe in ghosts, didn't believe in the supernatural. I was a skeptic, but whatever had happened that day, I couldn't explain it, and maybe I didn't need to. I didn't experience anything like that again. Not before, not after. But that one day, that one moment, stays with me. Every now and then, when I think back on it, I can still feel that weight in the air, the sensation that Sabbath was there with me, just for a little while. I miss him. I always will. Sabbath, if you somehow hear me, I miss you, buddy. I'm sorry I never said goodbye properly. You were the best friend I ever had. I was about 8 years old when my family decided to visit the Columbia City Hotel in California. The hotel, nestled in the heart of the state's gold rush country, was an old relic from a time long past. The place had history, and not just the kind you read about in books. It was supposed to be haunted, or so the locals said. But at 8 years old, I didn't care much about ghosts. What mattered was that it was a part of the old gold rush, and seemed like a fun place to explore. We were there for the history, not for any ghost stories. The hotel was a large, imposing building with creaky floors, tall windows, and a faded charm that suggested it had been around for centuries. It stood in the middle of Columbia State Historic Park, a town that had once been bustling with miners, merchants, and prospectors. The hotel, originally built in the 1850s, had seen its share of travelers, both living and dead, or so the tour guides claimed. But like I said, I wasn't paying attention to that. My parents were busy checking in, and I was hanging around, just waiting to get the keys and start the adventure. The lobby was dimly lit, with old portraits lining the walls and antique furniture scattered around the room. I wandered around, running my fingers along the dusty wood of the banister, peering up at the large staircase that led to the rooms. I could hear muffled voices from the tour guide, but I wasn't interested in what they had to say. To me, the place just seemed old, and old was cool. The idea that it was haunted didn't even cross my mind until much later. That night, after we settled into our room, I started to forget the spooky stories that had been mentioned earlier. It was just a hotel, and it seemed so normal. I went to bed in a big, old-fashioned four-poster bed with a thick quilt, the kind you don't see in modern hotels. I remember my parents being on the other side of the room in their bed, and I could hear the soft murmur of their conversation before they fell asleep. I had a hard time getting comfortable at first, tossing and turning in the unfamiliar bed, but eventually sleep came. Sometime in the early morning, I awoke suddenly. My eyes snapped open, and I was crying, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't the first time I'd had a nightmare or night terror, so I wasn't too alarmed at first. But this time, something felt different. It wasn't just the normal fear or unease that came with bad dreams. It felt more real, more tangible, even though I was still caught between sleep and waking. I could hear a soft humming. It was faint at first, almost like the sound of someone singing very quietly, as though they didn't want to wake anyone up. It sounded like a lullaby, soothing and calm, the kind my mom might hum to me when I was younger. But there was something else about it, something off. I lay in the bed, my body still and tense, listening. The humming seemed to come from very close by, almost as if it were right next to me. I turned my head slowly, careful not to wake my parents. Their breathing was steady on the other side of the room, so I knew they were asleep. The humming continued, faint but clear, a soft tune that almost seemed to be drifting through the air. And then it came, soft words barely audible. "Shoo, go back to sleep, baby." The voice sounded gentle, loving, like the voice of a mother trying to comfort her child. I wasn't scared at that moment. It felt familiar, comforting even. I was still groggy, barely awake, but I didn't think much of it. It was probably just a dream, I thought, some lingering part of my nightmare. But I didn't think about it again that night. I drifted off to sleep, the lullaby still echoing in my ears, and the soothing voice was the last thing I remembered before I fell into a deeper slumber. The next morning, I woke up and stretched, blinking in the soft morning light that filtered through the curtains. My parents were up already, talking about the day ahead. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the drowsiness. But as I sat up in bed, the events of the night before started to come back to me. The humming, the lullaby, the voice. I decided it had to have been a dream. A part of me didn't want to believe it was anything more. After all, I was in a big old hotel, and sometimes our minds just play tricks on us in unfamiliar places. But when we headed down to breakfast, something happened that made me second-guess everything. As we walked past the lobby, we overheard the tour guide giving another presentation. She was talking about the hotel's history, the gold rush, and all the people who had stayed there over the years. I wasn't paying much attention at first, but then I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. The guide was talking about a woman who had stayed in our room during the gold rush era. Apparently, she had been a young mother, and she had stayed at the hotel with her child. But the child died in infancy, and the mother had been inconsolable. The guide went on to say that people who stayed in the room claimed to have heard the sound of an infant crying or a soft lullaby being hummed, as if the mother's grief had never left the room. My stomach dropped. I hadn't heard this part of the tour before. I hadn't known about the woman or the child, and I certainly hadn't heard the guide mention it the day before. But everything I had experienced the night before came rushing back to me. The humming, the lullaby, the voice that had whispered, "Shoo, go back to sleep, baby." It was too much of a coincidence. It couldn't just be a dream. I didn't want to tell my parents what had happened. I wasn't sure how they'd react. Would they brush it off as just a bad dream? Would they think I was making it up? So, I kept it to myself. But as the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something that night. Something that I couldn't explain. Maybe it wasn't a ghost, but the events had been too real to simply dismiss. We spent the rest of the day exploring Columbia, the small historic town that surrounded the hotel. But the thought of the woman and her child stayed with me. It was like a shadow hanging over the day. I kept thinking about the voice, the lullaby, the calmness that I had felt despite the eerie strangeness of it all. That night, I lay in bed again, but I didn't sleep as easily as I had the night before. My mind kept returning to the tour guide's words and the events of the previous night. I told myself that it had to have been a dream. It had to have been, but I couldn't fully convince myself. There was something about the whole experience that felt too real, too vivid. In the days that followed, we checked out of the Columbia City Hotel and moved on to our next destination. The experience never really left me, though. Even as we drove away, I kept thinking about that soft humming and the voice. I wasn't scared, but I was unsettled. I couldn't help but feel like something had been there with me in that room. Something that was more than just my imagination. Years passed, and I eventually forgot about the Columbia City Hotel, or at least I tried to. But every so often, I would think back to that night and wonder if what I had experienced was really just a dream, or if there was something more to the story. Maybe I had heard the lullaby because of the grief that had lingered in that old room. Or maybe, just maybe, I had encountered something that wasn't a part of the hotel's history, something that was still there, waiting for the next guest. I never went back to the Columbia City Hotel, and I don't think I ever will. The memory of that night, though, will always stay with me. Not because I believe in ghosts or hauntings, but because sometimes there are things we can't explain, things that remain a mystery even when the story seems too unbelievable to be true. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe it was just the fear of being in a strange place. But whatever it was, it felt real. And even now, all these years later, I still wonder if I was the only one who heard the humming that night. I still remember the night like it was yesterday, even though it happened almost 30 years ago. It's funny how memories can get so etched into your mind, even when you're a kid and things seem less significant at the time. But that night, that sleepover at Amy's house, has always stuck with me. It was summer, and the days were long and hot, but the nights were always a bit cooler. I'd been to Amy's house for sleepovers before, but this one felt different somehow. We were 10 years old, maybe a little older, and Amy had always been a bit of a scaredy cat. Anything could set her off, and she had this uncanny ability to make even the most mundane things feel terrifying. The dark was one of her biggest fears, so I usually ended up comforting her at night when things got spooky for her. We were in Amy's room, which had a mattress on the floor for me to sleep on. The room was pretty small, but I remember it being cozy enough. The mattress was positioned in such a way that if I sat up, I would be looking directly down the hallway. Amy's mom's bedroom was to the left, and the bathroom was on the right. It wasn't a large house, so everything felt close and intimate. The night started out normal enough. We played games until it got late, and then Amy's mom tucked us into bed. Amy had 2 dogs that loved to bark at anything that moved, and of course, they started barking loudly at something outside. Amy and I were both awake at that point. The barking was so persistent and wild that it was impossible to ignore. Amy looked terrified, and before I could say anything, she slid out of bed and crawled over to mine. She told me she was scared and wanted to sleep with me. I remember being annoyed, but at the same time, I didn't want her to be upset. I told her it was just the dogs and that she should go back to sleep. She wasn't convinced though, and eventually, she just gave up and went to her mom's room, which was next door. I figured that was the end of it. The dogs were loud, but they were harmless. After Amy left, I rolled over on the mattress, pulled the blanket up around me, and eventually drifted back to sleep. It didn't take long before I woke up again, but this time, it wasn't the dogs that stirred me. It was the light. Summer mornings are early, and even before the sun fully rose, there was enough light to make the house feel less dark and more open. I opened my eyes slowly and found myself staring down the hallway. I don't know why I was so fixated on it, but something about the empty hallway caught my attention. As I glanced down the hall, I saw her. Amy's aunt, Sandra, was sitting on the couch. She was staring right at me. It wasn't like she was just sitting there, casually looking around, or half asleep. No, she was staring at me. Her face was so still, her eyes fixed directly on me. I remember feeling a sudden chill, a knot in my stomach that tightened as I realized she hadn't moved at all. I couldn't understand why she was sitting there, and I couldn't understand why she was staring at me like that. Now, Amy's Aunt Sandra was in the Air Force, and she would come by to visit when she was on leave. She had this aura of authority about her, and when she visited, it was always a big deal. But this time, it didn't feel right. I didn't know what was going on. It was just past 5 a.m., so I figured maybe she had just woken up early, but I still couldn't shake the unease. I remember lying there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. I would glance away, trying to adjust my position, but every time I looked back, she was still staring at me, her gaze unblinking. It felt like time slowed down, and I couldn't figure out if I was still asleep or if this was real. But eventually, after what felt like an eternity, Sandra looked away. Her eyes drifted to the side, and I took that as my chance to finally close my eyes again. I wasn't sure if I'd dreamt it or if it had really happened, but I tried to convince myself I had just imagined it. I managed to fall back asleep, though I wasn't completely at ease. My mind kept racing, replaying the image of Sandra on the couch. But when I woke up later that morning, it was much brighter outside, and everything felt different. It was closer to a normal time to get up. I didn't immediately remember what had happened, but as I started to stretch and yawn, I realized that I hadn't seen Sandra around since I woke up. I thought maybe I'd been imagining things, or maybe I was still half asleep. So, I asked Amy's mom where Sandra was. Amy's mom turned to me with a puzzled look on her face. She looked at me as if I had said something completely strange. "Huh, Sandra," she said. "Sandra's not here. She's in city. She's not even in town right now." I didn't know how to respond to that. My mind was spinning. I distinctly remembered seeing her, sitting there on the couch, staring at me. But now, Amy's mom was telling me that Sandra wasn't even there. How could that be? I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it had just been a weird half-dream or something that my mind had conjured in the dark. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been wrong. Why would I have seen Sandra so clearly, sitting there, staring at me, if she wasn't even in the house? And why hadn't I heard her leave the room, or even make a sound? It didn't make sense. I didn't tell Amy's mom what I had seen. It felt too strange, too confusing to explain. Besides, I didn't want her to think I was just making things up. But as I got older, the memory stayed with me. I couldn't forget it, no matter how many years passed. I still don't know what happened that morning, and to this day, I have no real explanation for what I saw. It's hard to make sense of it. Maybe it was a trick of my mind, but it didn't feel like it. It felt real, and even after all these years, I can still see Sandra's face in my mind, staring at me in the dim light of that early morning. And that feeling of being watched, even when no one should have been there, has stayed with me for all these years. Maybe I'll never know the truth about what happened that night. But what I do know is this: I wasn't dreaming. I was awake, and I saw something. And whatever it wasn't Sandra. I can't explain it, and I don't think I ever will. But every time I think back on that night, I can't help but feel the same sense of unease I felt when I first saw her sitting there, staring at me from across the hall. That night still sticks with me, even though it's been years. It was one of those moments where you think your life is in danger, but when you look back, you can't help but laugh at how everything unfolded. It all started the summer I was a freshman in high school. I was staying at UC Berkeley for a summer academic program. The building I was in was old, really old. The hallways were narrow, and the floors creaked with every step, but I didn't mind. I wasn't there to sightsee. I was there to learn, to be part of something bigger than my small-town high school. The dorm room itself wasn't much. The walls were thin, the air stale from years of use, and the furniture dated. There was a single bed on one side of the room, a tiny window that looked out over a dimly lit courtyard, a desk in the middle of the room, and a bunk bed on the other side. I shared it with two other girls, both of whom were in different sections of the program, so we didn't really spend much time together. We'd pass each other in the hallway or in the dining hall, but we were never really close. It was late when I finally got back to the room that evening. I'd been out with the program's group for a lecture, and by the time I returned, the hallway was mostly quiet, the lights dim. I'd stayed up late the night before, so I was exhausted. I didn't think much of the darkness or the silence. It felt normal. I used the light from my phone to set my things down on the desk, turned it off, and climbed into bed. I didn't even bother to change into pajamas. I just wanted to sleep. I was on the top bunk. My bed was pressed up against the wall, the thin mattress not the most comfortable, but I didn't care. I shut my eyes, trying to settle in, and drifted off to sleep almost instantly. I have no idea how long I was asleep before I woke up again. It couldn't have been more than an hour, but everything felt off. My heart was racing, and I could hear my roommate calling my name from the other side of the room. "Hey," she whispered, her voice low and shaky. "Are you awake?" I groggily turned over, squinting in the dark. "What?" I hissed, trying to keep my voice down. She was crying now, her voice trembling. "There's someone in here. I saw them come in and go through our stuff. I don't know who it is, but I saw them." I froze. My body went cold. It was like all the blood drained out of me in that instant. For a moment, I couldn't even think. My brain was trying to process what she had said, but I couldn't make sense of it. What was she talking about? I was supposed to be alone in the room with her and the other girl on the bottom bunk, who, as far as I knew, was fast asleep. And yet, there she was, shaking and whispering about an intruder. I listened for a second, trying to hear any sounds. But there was nothing. Just the usual hum of the air conditioner that had been running all day. Silence. It didn't make sense. I heard her again, this time in a quiet, panicked voice, pleading. "Please don't hurt us. Please. Take whatever you want. Just don't hurt us." I could hear her begging, repeating the same words over and over again, and my stomach twisted into a knot. Fear gripped me like nothing I had ever felt. My heart was pounding in my chest. I could hear my own breath now, shallow and fast, and I realized I hadn't moved. I was paralyzed with fear, lying there in the dark, not knowing what to do. I thought about getting out of the bed, but I couldn't bring myself to. What if they heard me? What if there really was someone in here with us? What if they were waiting for me to make a sound, to move? I glanced to the side, towards the bottom bunk, and saw that my other roommate was awake now too, her eyes wide with fear. She looked just as scared as I felt. The girl across from me kept talking, still pleading. "Please don't hurt us," she whispered again. "Please just leave." The silence stretched on. I couldn't hear any footsteps, nothing. Just her voice. I felt like the walls were closing in around me, and the air was thick, suffocating. I had no idea what to do. My mind was racing. I grabbed my phone, hoping to call for help, but of course, I had no service. Nothing. I tried to think, tried to come up with a plan, but all I could do was listen to my roommate's voice crack with fear. That's when it hit me. I had to do something. I couldn't just lie there and wait for whoever it was to come closer. I had to protect us, but I couldn't even bring myself to look off the side of the bunk. I had no idea where the intruder was. Could they be right below me, standing by the desk? Were they in the closet? Maybe they were already behind the curtain waiting. I looked around. The room was too dark to see much. The only light was the faint glow from the hallway through the small, high window, but it didn't help. I couldn't make out shapes. I heard the girl's voice again, quieter this time. He's still here. I know he's here. Please do something. Please. I realized then that I had to do something. I couldn't just lie there. I had to protect my roommates. I didn't know what to do, but I had to act. I told them both I was going to run for the light switch near the door. If we outnumbered him, we could take him on, or at least find a way to get out. But neither of them could move. They were both too scared to make a sound, to make a move. I could feel my pulse in my ears, the adrenaline pushing me into action. I was ready to jump off the bunk, but something stopped me. I looked down at them again, and I saw the panic in their eyes. I couldn't leave them behind. I didn't know what the intruder was capable of, but I knew that running without them was a risk I wasn't willing to take. One of the girls suddenly spoke, her voice shaking but firm. "No, I'm not letting you go alone. We're going together." And then, just like that, the three of us linked arms. No hesitation. We didn't know what was waiting for us at the door, but we were going together. We sprinted, full speed. We didn't even think twice. I pushed open the door, the metal of the doorknob cold in my hand. The hallway outside was dim, the lights flickering above us as we ran down the corridor, our footsteps echoing off the walls. We didn't look back, didn't stop to catch our breath. We just kept running until we reached the leader's hallway. We banged on the door, frantic, our voices all blending together as we shouted for help. Security came, and they checked the room. There was no one there. No one at all. They looked through the closet, under the bed, in the bathroom. Nothing. They even asked if we'd had a bad dream, if we were just confused. But there was no doubt in my mind. Something had been there. Someone had been there. But no one was ever found. We were shaken, all of us. The kind of shaken where your hands won't stop trembling, where you can't stop looking over your shoulder, afraid that someone is still out there watching. That night, we all decided to switch rooms. It wasn't just the fear of what might have happened. It was the feeling of being violated, of having your space invaded in the most terrifying way. For years, I carried that fear with me. I thought about it all the time. What if we had waited too long? What if we hadn't run? What if something had happened? But eventually, I figured it out. The girl who had seen the figure coming into the room had been looking from an angle where she couldn't see me climbing into bed. She thought someone had entered the room after I'd gone to sleep, but it had been me all along. I had come in late, set my things down quietly, and climbed into bed. She hadn't seen me. She had assumed I was already asleep. Looking back, it makes me laugh. The panic, the fear, the way we all thought our lives were in danger. It was just me. I had scared us all, and we had scared ourselves. It was the creepiest thing that ever happened to me at the time, but now, I just shake my head and laugh. It's funny in a way, how a simple misunderstanding can turn into something so terrifying. But in that moment, it felt all too real. I was about 10 or 11 years old when it happened, and at that age, I was just beginning to understand the world around me, but not quite enough to make the sharp, clear judgments adults could. I was at the church softball game that day, standing just outside the diamond with my bat, waiting for my turn to step up to the plate. The sun was still high in the sky, casting a warm glow on the dusty field. I had the distinct feeling of anticipation, the tension you always feel before you're about to do something, like being right on the edge of a wave, waiting for it to crash over you. In this case, it was about to be my turn at bat, and I was getting in a few practice swings along the third base line. There was a little breeze blowing, stirring the air, but it wasn't enough to cool down the heat of that summer afternoon. The game was in full swing, the crack of the bat echoing across the field. players shouting in the distance. The stands were full, the bleachers lined with parents, kids, and friends who had come to watch. It was a typical scene for our church league, nothing out of the ordinary. Just a bunch of kids playing ball, nothing too serious. I was in a good mood, my mind focused on the game, when this older guy came up to me. He wasn't part of the game, and I don't think he was there to watch, but I didn't give it much thought at the time. He looked like he was in his late 30s or early 40s, with a scruffy beard and a weathered face that seemed to carry more stories than it probably should have. His clothes weren't anything fancy, just a t-shirt, some worn jeans, and sneakers. Nothing about him screamed danger, and that's probably what I remember most about him. He looked perfectly normal. In fact, he looked like someone's dad or maybe an uncle. He walked up with a casual ease and smiled as he greeted me, making small talk about the game. "Hey, looks like you're up soon, huh?" he said, nodding towards the field. "How's the game going?" I smiled back, swinging my bat a little more confidently. I wasn't really interested in chatting, but it wasn't uncommon for people to talk to you while you were on the sidelines. It was just a part of being a kid in a small town, surrounded by people you mostly knew. My focus was still on the game. He kept going, asking about the league and who we were playing against that day. All the usual questions that adults ask kids to seem engaged, to fill the space with friendly conversation. I didn't think much of it. I was more worried about whether I'd be able to get a good hit when my turn came. But then he said something that made me pause. "I've got a bit of a problem," he said, his tone changing just slightly, something in his voice now a little more urgent. "I locked my keys in the truck, and I've got my dog inside. It's pretty hot out, and I'm worried about him. I was wondering if you could help me out real quick. I've got this small window in the back of the cab. It's just big enough for a kid to fit through. Could you crawl in and unlock it for me? It'd be a huge favor." At the time, I didn't think much of it. My first instinct wasn't fear. It was a feeling of wanting to help. I mean, what was the harm, right? A dog in a hot truck, a locked door, and a guy who seemed to be in a bit of a panic. That could happen to anyone. I thought about it for a moment, still gripping my bat, and considered his request. He pointed over his shoulder, and I could see the truck parked near the edge of the field. It wasn't too far away. I remember thinking the situation seemed a little odd, but not odd enough to make me question it deeply. I mean, it was broad daylight, there were people all around, and the whole church softball league was there. It wasn't like I was alone, right? I felt like I could handle it, maybe be the good kid, and help this guy out. It wasn't until later that I realized how close I was to making a decision that could have had much worse consequences. The truck had a small window in the back of the cab, just like he said. It seemed plausible, right? Maybe the guy was just in a bad situation and needed a little help. What harm could there be in squeezing through a tiny window to unlock a truck door? But then as I stood there, waiting to answer, I saw the game move along. The batter ahead of me hit the ball, and suddenly it was my turn. I was only a few batters away from being up. I knew I didn't have time to do what the guy was asking. And in that brief moment, I realized that I could tell him I was about to bat, that I couldn't help him right then. So that's what I did. "I'm actually up soon," I said, "but I'm sure you'll find someone else to help you." The guy looked a little disappointed but smiled and nodded, as though it wasn't a big deal. He turned and walked away, disappearing toward the other side of the field. It wasn't until later that I realized how lucky I was to have come up with an excuse. After the game, everything seemed normal again. We won, I think. I don't really remember the specifics of the game or how we did. It's a blur. But I do remember mentioning it casually to my parents. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just said, "Hey, some guy asked me to help him with his truck. He said his dog was locked in there, and he needed someone to climb in through the window." I figured it was a harmless story, just something odd that had happened during the game. My parents, though, didn't react the way I expected. My dad immediately grew serious, his face shifting from relaxed to concerned. My mom was quiet for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "What did he look like?" my dad asked, his voice firm. "What was he wearing? Where was he standing? What did he say exactly?" I remember feeling confused, like I'd said something wrong, but I answered the best I could. I told them what I remembered, his clothes, his face, his mannerisms. My dad didn't say much, but I could tell he was putting everything together in his head. The way he kept looking at my mom, like they were both thinking the same thing. I had no idea what was going on until later that evening. My dad pulled out his phone and made a call, but I didn't know who he was talking to. I didn't think it was anything to worry about, maybe just a friend or a colleague. But then, a few days later, I overheard them talking in hushed tones. They were discussing the man I'd seen, and how the description I'd given them matched a man who'd been arrested in the area. Apparently, not long after that incident, the man had been caught trying to kidnap a child from the same neighborhood. The news hit me hard. My parents kept an eye on the local news, and that's when they saw the arrest. The man had been caught trying to lure another child into his vehicle. My stomach sank when I realized how close I had been to saying yes. The chilling part was how normal he had seemed, how he blended into the background of the day. He looked like just another adult, someone you might pass by in a crowd without a second thought. But his intentions were anything but normal. I felt a mix of emotions: guilt, relief, and a kind of horror I couldn't quite explain. Guilt because I'd been so close to making a dangerous decision. Relief because somehow I'd been saved by the timing of the game. And horror at the thought that if I had said yes, if I had just taken a few more steps toward that truck, who knows what could have happened. To this day, it haunts me. I think back to that moment, that brief conversation, and I can't help but wonder how many other kids might have been in the same situation. How many kids didn't have that moment of clarity, that brief pause before they made a decision? I was lucky. It's hard to explain how something so small, so seemingly insignificant, could have saved me from something so much worse. I often think about what could have happened if I had just been a little more naive, a little more trusting. I don't know if that man had planned to hurt me or if he had been eyeing other kids too, but I do know one thing: I was lucky. It was a lesson I didn't fully grasp at the time, but one I would carry with me forever. Years later, when I look back on it, I realized just how much my parents had been looking out for me. They had seen the warning signs before I even knew they existed. They had known that something wasn't right, and they had acted on it. And in the end, it was their vigilance that kept me safe. As for that man, I never saw him again. I hope I never do. It started like a normal week. Nothing felt different at first. I had work, the kids had school, and we were all just doing our usual things. But now that I look back, I think I had been ignoring the little things that had been happening for a while. Like things not being where I left them, or hearing footsteps in the hallway when I knew no one was there. I always brushed it off. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was just the kids. But that one week, it went too far. It was terrifying, and I still don't like thinking about it. But I remember it all, because how could I forget? The first night it really started, I was woken up just after midnight. It wasn't a loud sound, more like soft banging. Repetitive. I laid there at first, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what it was. I thought maybe the wind had blown something over outside, but it kept going. Tap, tap, bang, tap. It didn't feel natural. Then my son started screaming. Not just crying, but full-on screaming like something was hurting him. I jumped out of bed and ran into his room, heart pounding. He was sitting up in bed, pale, pointing at his dresser. I didn't even need to ask what happened. The drawers were sliding open, then slamming shut, one after another, over and over. I pulled the dresser away from the wall to check if it was loose, or if the floor was tilted or something, but it wasn't. I calmed him down and let him sleep in my bed that night. I didn't sleep much after that. I stayed up watching the hallway, waiting to hear the drawers start up again. The next day, I tried to forget about it. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe my son had a bad dream and kicked the drawers open without realizing. I told myself anything I could to avoid the truth of what it felt like the house was doing it on its own. I took care of the baby, did some laundry, and tried to make it through the day without thinking about it. But that night, it got worse. I had just fed the baby and was in the kitchen warming up her bottle again. I bent over the table to reach for something, and right then, the light fixture above me exploded. Not just one bulb, all of them. Every single bulb in the chandelier blew out at once. It wasn't just a pop or a flicker. It was like a small bomb went off right over my head. The sound was deafening. Tiny pieces of glass rained down on me. I dropped the bottle, covered my head, and crouched down. I could feel pieces of hot glass hit my arms and back. I stayed there for a second, frozen. Then I stood up slowly and looked around. The bulbs were all shattered. The baby started crying in the other room, and I rushed in, still shaking, to make sure she was okay. I kept checking the power in the rest of the house. Everything else was fine. Just that one light, right over my head. No warning. Just gone. I swept up the glass in silence and went to bed with the baby in my arms. The third night, my son had a balloon from school, just a regular red helium balloon with a long white string. He had been playing with it all day. That night, we were in the living room watching TV, and he was holding it while sitting on the floor. I wasn't really paying attention. Then I saw his hand empty. The balloon was floating slowly across the room, as if pulled by a breeze. But there was no breeze. Every window was closed. The AC wasn't on. I watched it move, slowly but purposefully, and I froze. It didn't float like a balloon normally does. It glided, like someone was guiding it. And then I saw the string. It was pulled tight, like someone invisible had grabbed it and was pulling it along. The balloon moved all the way to the hallway and disappeared around the corner. My son called for it, but I told him to stay there, and I followed it. It floated into the basement door and then down the stairs. I watched it descend. I didn't want to go after it. I just stood there, watching it vanish into the darkness. A few minutes later, it came back up, still pulled along by that tight string, and floated right past me again. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It drifted all the way upstairs and turned into the attic staircase. I don't even remember moving. I think I was just stunned. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, holding the baby, trying to keep calm for the kids. But inside, I was cracking. The next night, it was around 3 a.m. when my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw it was my neighbor from across the street. She's not the type to call for no reason, especially not at that hour. I answered, still half asleep. Her voice was shaking. She asked if I was okay. She said I needed to check on the kids right away, and that she had already called the police. She said there were people, a lot of people, surrounding my house, standing on the lawn, in the backyard, near the windows. She counted at least a dozen. I jumped up, heart racing, and ran to the window. I saw nothing. Not one single person. I checked every window, even ran outside with my phone's flashlight. There was no one there. No footprints. No sign anyone had ever been there. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they did a full check. Nothing. They found nothing. But my neighbor swore she saw them. She said they were just standing there, watching the house. She said she could see their outlines in the dark. When she tried to wave or call out, they didn't move. That's when she panicked and called me. I believed her. She's not a liar. She's not dramatic. Something was happening, and I didn't know what to do. The night after that, my other neighbor, the one who lives beside me, in the house that overlooks our attic window, came pounding on the door. I was already up, sitting on the couch with the baby, rocking her to sleep. He looked pale and shaken. He asked me why there was a woman staring out of my attic window. I didn't even respond. I just stared at him. He said he had seen her 2 nights in a row. She had long black hair and stood still, just staring. But here's the thing. There's no floor under that attic window. It's just open beams. There's no way for anyone to stand there. I had looked at that space when we moved in and had even been told not to store anything up there because of the risk of falling through. I told him no one could get over to that window. He didn't say anything else. Just turned around and walked back home. I didn't even try to explain. What would I have said? The final straw came 2 nights later. I was alone with the baby. My older son was spending the night at his grandmother's. I had just finished feeding the baby and laid her in the middle of my bed, swaddled tight like I always did. I put a ring of body pillows around her, just in case. She was also in her little side sleeper cushion, the one that keeps her on her side and stops her from rolling. She was safe, still, and sleeping peacefully. I went to take a quick shower. I left the bathroom door open so I could hear her. The water was hot, and for a moment I tried to let myself relax. But something didn't feel right. I rushed out of the bathroom after just a few minutes and went to the bedroom. My heart dropped. She wasn't in the side sleeper. She wasn't even inside the pillow ring. She was lying right near the edge of the bed, her swaddle slightly undone. There's no way she could have done that on her own. Not at that age. Not with how tight I had swaddled her. And the way the pillows were placed, she would have had to roll over them or climb out, which was impossible. I felt my knees give. I ran to her, picked her up, and held her close. She was still asleep, but I was done. I started yelling. I didn't even care how I sounded. I was shaking. I was crying. I was furious. I had been scared before, but this was too far. I yelled at the walls. I said whatever was there, it had crossed the line. You can break lights, you can move balloons, you can knock on drawers, but you never touch my children. Never. I grabbed my phone and called the only pastor I knew. I told him I needed the house blessed. I needed it done now. I couldn't live like this anymore. He came the next morning. He didn't ask many questions. I think he could tell by the look on my face that something serious had happened. He went room to room, reading from his Bible, sprinkling holy water. I walked behind him holding my baby, while my son followed quietly. After he was done, the house felt different. I can't explain it, but the air didn't feel so heavy anymore. The hallway didn't feel dark, even when the lights were off. That night, I actually slept. So did my son. So did the baby. We stayed there for another 2 months, but I never felt the same about that house. Even if nothing else happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting, like whatever was there was just sleeping, not gone. So we moved. I found a smaller place across town. It's not fancy, but it's peaceful. Quiet. We've never had another issue. The old house has changed hands twice since we left. Both families stayed less than 3 months. One of them left in the middle of the night, furniture still inside, food still in the fridge. The other left after a few weeks and told the realtor the house had a strange feeling. They didn't explain. Now the house sits empty. The bank keeps trying to sell it, but no one stays. I've driven past it a few times, and every time I do, I feel a weight settle in my chest. Like something in there remembers me. I don't know what was in that house. I don't care what anyone else believes. I lived through it. I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. It was real. And I don't think it's gone. I think it's still there, waiting for whoever is next. I just thank God it's not me or my kids anymore. That house can stay empty forever, for all I care. We're never going back. I used to be left alone a lot when I was a kid. My mom had a boyfriend at the time, and she'd spend a lot of her nights at his place instead of coming home. I never really got used to it. It wasn't that I was scared of being by myself exactly. More like I didn't like how quiet everything felt once the sun went down. The silence of the house didn't feel normal, not the kind that made you feel calm. It felt like something was missing or waiting. The house wasn't anything special. 2 stories, older build, with a steep roof and creaky stairs. My bedroom was on the top floor, in the corner where the ceiling sloped down, making the whole room feel tighter than it was. I used to like that room. It felt cozy when I was younger, but after a while, it just felt isolated. It started one weekend while my mom was gone. I had the TV on downstairs, just letting it play in the background while I sat around not really watching it. I was sitting on the couch, eating some cereal at around midnight, and I heard it, soft, slow movement from the ceiling. At first, I thought maybe it was just the house settling, but the sound had a rhythm to it, like footsteps. I muted the TV to listen better. It wasn't loud, but it was definitely real. It was the kind of noise that's hard to explain, more like a scuffing sound, like someone crawling on their knees across the roof, slow and careful. I could tell it was directly above me, and then it shifted. The footsteps moved from above the living room to right over the hallway, then toward the stairs. They stopped there. I froze. My hands were shaking a bit, and the cereal bowl rattled slightly in my lap. I grabbed my phone and called my mom. She answered, voice tired, clearly not interested in whatever I had to say. I told her someone was on the roof. I wasn't joking. I was whispering because I didn't want whoever it was to hear me, and I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. She said I was imagining things, probably the wind or maybe a tree branch. I told her it wasn't the wind. I told her it sounded like someone walking, like with knees and hands pressed against the roof. She just told me to turn the volume up on the TV and stop thinking about it. She didn't want to come back home, and I could tell. So I did what she said. I turned up the volume and tried to pretend it wasn't happening. But it kept happening. For months. Not every night, but enough to make me question everything. Sometimes it would go weeks without a sound, and then all of a sudden, it would be back. Always when I was alone. Always when the house was quiet. Always from the roof. I got into the habit of sleeping with the TV on in my room, just to drown out the silence. Sometimes I'd lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling. I started avoiding my room, spending more time downstairs. My grades started dropping. I was exhausted all the time. I even started trying to stay at friends' houses whenever I could. I told my mom every time it happened. She started brushing me off more and more. I think she really believed I was making it up for attention. At one point, she told me flat out that I needed to grow up. that it was just me being scared because I was used to someone being home, that I needed to toughen up. So I stopped telling her about it. I kept it to myself, even though the sound was getting louder, bolder. Like whoever, or whatever, was up there knew no one believed me. Then something changed. It was a Sunday morning. I was still in bed, just staring at the ceiling. My mom had stayed the night for once. She was downstairs making coffee when I heard it again. The sound of weight shifting on the roof. This time it was quick, like it was moving fast, almost frantic. I didn't move. I just waited. A few minutes later, I heard her call out my name. I went downstairs and she looked pale, holding her coffee cup with both hands like she was trying not to spill it. She asked if I had heard it. I nodded. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said it must be a mouse. Just a mouse in the crawl space between the ceiling and roof. Nothing to worry about. But that didn't make sense to me. The sounds were too heavy, too deliberate. Mice didn't move like that. Still, I didn't argue. I was just relieved that she had finally heard it. That week, she came home with mouse traps. Just the small kind with a spring-loaded bar and some cheese. We set them up in the attic and waited. A few days later, they were gone. Not tripped, not snapped, just gone. She said maybe we didn't set them right. So she bought rat traps instead, the bigger ones. Same thing. Gone the next day. Then we got serious. We went to a hardware store in the next town and bought those metal claw traps. The kind with teeth on them, the kind used for small wild animals. We put them up there with peanut butter, marshmallows, even canned tuna. Nothing. Not a single one tripped. Food gone. Traps still set. We tried humane traps too. Big metal cages. We lined them with bait, with peanut butter and cat food. The doors never shut. Bait gone. The mechanism untouched. It was like whatever was up there knew exactly how the traps worked. Knew how to avoid them. It made no sense. That's when we decided to inspect the roof more closely. One afternoon, we pulled out the ladder and went up. The roof was a mess. Old shingles, warped boards. After a lot of careful looking, we found the hole. A small one, back near the edge, hidden beneath a loose section of the gutter. It was just wide enough for something small, but not too small, to squeeze through. We sealed it up with mesh and heavy-duty nails. After that, things went quiet for a while. No noises, no movement. I finally slept with the TV off for the first time in months. But it didn't last. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in. Big, loud, violent. I was in bed, and my cat, a fat gray tabby named Ghost, was curled up at the end of the bed. When the thunder started, he jumped off and walked to the center of the room, staring straight up at the ceiling. I watched him for a minute, then joined him. I followed his gaze and listened. There it was again, but louder this time. Not just footsteps, scratching, clawing, like something was trying to tear its way out. I couldn't move. My mom's boyfriend was over that night. He saw me and the cat staring at the ceiling, and without saying anything, he grabbed a flashlight, a bat, a bottle of Jack Daniels, and is chewing tobacco. He stumbled outside, climbed the ladder, and disappeared onto the roof. I stood in the driveway, watching from below. Lightning lit up the sky every few seconds, and I could see his silhouette moving along the ridge. Then he stopped. He just stood there for a long time, not saying anything. When he came down, he looked different. He was pale, sweating. He handed the flashlight to my mom and went inside without a word. Later that night, he finally said what he saw. He said it had eyes, bright, intelligent eyes, and a black mask over its face. It was a raccoon, a big one, smarter than any animal he'd ever seen. Not scared of humans. He said it watched him the way people do, not like prey, but like it was thinking, planning. Over the next few weeks, we made a plan. We waited until we were sure it had returned, then went up together, me, my mom, and her boyfriend. This time we went with gloves, nets, and a tranquilizer dart he got from some hunting friend. It took a couple nights, but eventually we got it. It was huge, nearly the size of a medium dog, muscles thick under its fur. It didn't hiss or scream when we caught it. It just stared at us, calm, defeated. My mom's boyfriend, being a taxidermist, did what he did best. We kept the raccoon, cleaned up, preserved, posed, and mounted. It sat in our hallway for years after that, right at the bottom of the stairs. I thought that was the end of it. Months went by. Life started feeling normal again. My mom stayed home more often. I got better sleep. I started focusing on school again. Everything felt like it had finally gone back to the way it used to be. Then one afternoon, I came home from school, and went upstairs to my room. My light was off, which was strange. I always forgot to turn it off. I figured maybe my mom had come up and done it. I pushed the door open and froze. There, sitting on my desk, was another raccoon. Alive, just sitting there like it belonged. It was a little smaller than the last one, but just as bold. It didn't run, didn't growl. It just sat there and looked at me, blinking slowly. I backed out of the room, heart racing, then ran down the stairs calling for help. My mom and her boyfriend burst out laughing when they saw me. It was the stuffed raccoon. They'd taken it from the hallway and propped it up on my desk to mess with me. They thought it was hilarious. At first, I was mad. Furious, really. But then I started laughing too. Because it was over. The months of not sleeping, the feeling of losing my mind, the isolation, all of it, it was over. That raccoon had felt like a ghost, something no one else could see or believe. It had nearly convinced everyone I was making it up. And now it was just a statue. Just a joke. I kept that raccoon with me for years. When I moved out, I took it to my apartment. I didn't tell anyone the story. I just said it was something from my childhood. A few neighbor boys who lived in the building asked if they could have it. They were obsessed with how lifelike it looked. I gave it to them when I was packing to move. They were thrilled. I never told them what it really was or what it had done. Now it's sitting in someone else's living room, still frozen in that same pose, still wearing that same blank expression. But for me, it's just a reminder of the nights I spent alone, of the silence that didn't feel right, of what it felt like to not be believed, and how sometimes the thing that haunts you isn't a ghost or a monster. It's just something alive, something real, something smart. And sometimes, all you can do is wait until the scratching stops. We grew up in a small town where life seemed simple. It was one of those places where kids could wander around all day without worrying about the usual dangers of the world. No one really seemed to care if we went off into the woods or wandered down to the creek to build forts or fish. It was a different time, a time when innocence wasn't yet stained by the harshness of the world. My best friend, Ben, and I spent hours together, most of it in the woods behind his house. He had a dog, a big mutt named Max, that always came along with us. Max was loyal and goofy, following us everywhere, and we always felt safer with him around. The forest was our sanctuary. For the last 2 years, we had been building a hideout there, a little fort made from old tree branches, rocks, and whatever materials we could scrounge up. We'd worked on it tirelessly, making it our secret base. It was a place to escape from the world, where we could laugh, play, and pretend that we were untouchable. The woods were familiar to us. Every path, every creek, every tree was like an old friend. It was our safe space. That day, as we walked toward the forest, I felt the usual excitement building in my chest. It was a sunny afternoon, and we were on our way to make a few more improvements to the hideout. Max, as always, was running around ahead of us, sniffing the air and wagging his tail. We were talking about what we wanted to add to our fort, maybe some walls made of sticks or a secret trapdoor. It wasn't until we were just about to step into the forest that we saw him. At first, it was just a figure in the distance. He was walking along the path, and I thought nothing of it. But as we got closer, I could see more clearly. He was an older guy, in his mid-30s, maybe 40. His clothes were filthy, torn in places, and there was something about the way he carried himself that set off an alarm in my head. He didn't look like he belonged in the woods, at least not in the same way we did. There was something unsettling about him. His hair was matted and dirty, his skin looked pale and unhealthy, and his movements were jerky, like he was either out of his mind or not fully aware of his surroundings. I remember feeling uneasy, but it wasn't until he squatted down and started pulling his pants down that I realized something was really off. Ben and I both froze in place. The guy didn't even seem to care that we were there. He just pulled his pants down, squatted, and started taking a crap right there on the path. I could hear the sound of it hitting the ground. It was loud, disgusting, and for a split second, I just stared at him, not sure what to do. It was as if the world had stopped for a moment, and all I could focus on was the sickening sight in front of me. I could feel Ben tense up beside me, and I knew we had to get out of there. But before we could move, the guy must have heard us because he turned around, his eyes wild. "What the fuck are you looking at?" he yelled, his voice raspy and angry. He stood up quickly, pulling his pants back up, and in that instant, something in his expression changed. His anger shifted, and a look of menace crossed his face. Without another word, he grabbed a large stick from the ground and started to chase us. Ben, always quicker than I was, took off running in the opposite direction, heading toward the town. Max, the dog, followed him, barking like mad. I didn't have time to think. I turned and bolted in the other direction, toward our hideout in the woods. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my legs felt like they were going to give out, but I kept running, the sound of my breath and the crunching of leaves beneath my feet filling my ears. I didn't dare look back. I had to get to the hideout, our safe spot, where I knew the guy wouldn't follow. I finally made it to the hideout, the little fort we had spent so much time building. My hands were shaking, and I could barely catch my breath. I leaned against one of the trees, trying to calm myself, my mind racing. Had Ben made it out too? Was he okay? I waited for what felt like an eternity, but it was quiet. No sound of running footsteps or barking. I slowly started to feel the dread creeping in. I left the hideout cautiously, stepping through the underbrush as quietly as I could. I wasn't sure where Ben had gone, but I figured he would have headed to the place we always went when we needed to hide, down by the creek, where the thick trees formed a small clearing. I made my way there, my heart still racing, fear gnawing at me. I had no idea what had happened to the guy or how close he was, but the thought of him still being out there, somewhere in the woods, made me feel sick. When I reached the clearing, I saw Ben, but it wasn't the sight I was hoping for. He was standing there, his hands covered in blood, and his eyes wide with shock. Max, the dog, was lying on the ground beside him, not moving. I could feel the world go numb around me as I ran toward him. Ben! I shouted, panic flooding my chest. What happened? Are you okay? Ben didn't respond at first. He was just staring at the ground, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. I looked down at Max, and my stomach twisted in knots. The dog's body was mangled beyond recognition. There was blood everywhere, and the once lively animal looked like it had been torn apart. I could barely make out the shape of Max's head, but it was clear that something had been done to him, something cruel and unforgiving. Ben, what happened? I asked again, my voice barely a whisper. Ben finally looked up at me, his face pale and blank. He beat Max. With a stick. He just kept hitting him, even after he was dead. I tried to stop him, but I couldn't. He just kept screaming and hitting him. His voice cracked as he spoke, and I could see that the memory was too much for him to bear. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, staring at the blood-soaked ground, feeling a cold rage bubble up inside me. The man who had chased us down was insane, twisted, and he had taken everything from us. Max was more than just a dog. He was our friend, part of our lives for years. And now he was gone because some crazy person had decided to hurt him. I stepped closer to Ben, trying to comfort him, but there was nothing I could do. Nothing could undo what had happened. Nothing could bring Max back. I helped Ben up, and together we walked back toward his house. He was quiet, lost in his own thoughts. While I kept my eyes on the ground, the image of Max's lifeless body burned into my mind. When we got to Ben's house, I knew what had to be done. Ben was too shaken up to speak, so I had to tell his mom what had happened. I remember her face when I told her, the shock and disbelief washing over her like a tidal wave. She immediately called the police, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew, just like I did, that the police wouldn't find the guy. They never did. They assumed he was just some crazy homeless person wandering through town, someone who had no business being there in the first place. The police came, took our statements, and looked around, but there was no sign of the man. It was like he had disappeared into the woods, just as quickly and mysteriously as he had come. They told us they would keep an eye out for him, but deep down, I knew it was over. The guy was gone, and there was no justice for Max. No closure. Ben never fully recovered from that day. He didn't talk much about it after that, and it took years before he could even tell anyone what he had witnessed. The trauma was too much for him to process. It stayed with him, like a dark shadow that would never leave. As for me, I never looked at the woods the same way again. It wasn't the place of adventure it used to be. It wasn't the safe haven where we could escape from the world. It had become a place of fear, of violence, and of loss. The innocence I had felt there was gone. The man was never found, and for a long time, it felt like justice had never been served. But over time, the memory faded a little. I never forgot Max, and I never forgot what happened to Ben, but life moved on. I learned that sometimes things happen that you can't control, things that leave scars that never fully heal. Ben and I are still friends, But that day changed everything. The woods are no longer a place of refuge for me. Instead, they serve as a reminder of the darkness that can exist in the world and of how quickly innocence can be lost. It was a regular evening, or at least it should have been. I was hanging out with my girlfriend and two friends at her apartment, which was located on the first floor of a slightly worn-out building in the city. The apartment itself was small, a cozy studio with minimal decor. She liked it that way. We were all planning to head downtown later in the night, but for now, we were enjoying a calm pregame, sipping drinks, and having a few cigarettes on the porch. The air was a little cool, and the smell of the city was mixed with the faint scent of cigarette smoke. It was nothing special, but it felt comfortable. We were all just chatting, joking around, when one of my friends, let's call him Max, asked who else was coming over. He was staring inside through the window. It was a small studio, so you could see pretty much everything from outside. My girlfriend, Amy, had just moved in, and the place still had that newness about it. New furniture, new decor, new knives hanging up in the kitchen. I glanced over at the window, figuring Max was talking about some other friend of Amy's. But then I saw it. The man. He was standing right there in the kitchen, staring at the set of knives that I'd just installed on the wall. There was something off about the way he stood, his posture too stiff, like he was studying the knives, trying to figure out which one would be most useful. He had that cracked-out look about him, unkempt hair, twitchy movements, and a posture that screamed that he was either high, desperate, or both. The hair on the back of my neck stood up immediately. My heart rate spiked. I don't know why, but I felt pure instinct take over. My adrenaline surged, and without thinking, I turned and sprinted for the door. I didn't even think about knocking. I wasn't going to let him stay there. He'd already crossed a line by being in her apartment. I threw the door open, slamming it into the wall behind me, and rushed inside. At first, the place was quiet, almost unnervingly so. It was the kind of silence you get when you're suddenly aware that something is very wrong. Then I heard him, shuffling in the small hallway. I could feel him trying to hide, moving toward the closet at the back of the apartment. My blood was pounding in my ears. I didn't know what I was dealing with yet, but I had to stop it before it got worse. I barged into the hallway and immediately went for the closet. The second I flung open the door, I froze for a split second. There he was, crouching in the corner, his body hunched and shaking. His eyes were wide, wild, like a caged animal caught by surprise. Then, without warning, he screamed. It was a sound that made my skin crawl. High-pitched, ear-splitting, like a banshee being dragged through hell. I flinched, stepping back just for a moment, but then the survival instinct kicked in. I lunged at him, tackling him to the ground. The moment I pinned him, I felt the weight of his body, the tremble of his movements. He was stronger than I thought, thrashing beneath me, but I was on top, controlling the situation. His hands shot up, and I realized just in time that he had a tool in his grip. It was a medium-sized flathead screwdriver, sharp, jagged, and more than capable of doing some damage. In a split second, I shoved his hand away from me, holding it down against the floor. My chest was heaving with the effort, my mind racing, processing everything at once. I was holding him down, but I didn't know how much longer I could do it. I had to keep him under control until help came. His breath was ragged, coming in sharp gasps, like he was trying to catch his breath from the panic. I could smell the stink of sweat, cheap liquor, and something else, something foul that made me want to gag. I still couldn't figure out why he was there. Was he looking for something? Was he planning on stealing the knives? Or was this just some random, desperate act of madness? I kept my weight on him, my mind screaming that I needed to keep him pinned. I looked around the apartment, feeling the tension fill the space. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the weight of the situation hit me hard. I didn't want to hurt him, but I knew I had to stop him from getting that screwdriver anywhere near me. Then I heard Amy's voice from behind me, coming through the door. Her tone was frantic, calling out my name, probably scared out of her mind. I couldn't even respond. My entire focus was on the man beneath me, trying to figure out what the hell was going through his mind. Max, my friend, must have heard the chaos and was now right behind her, yelling to call the cops. I heard Amy do exactly that, her voice trembling as she spoke with the dispatcher. But the whole time, I kept my eyes on the man. He was still trying to free himself, his body writhing beneath me. I could feel the tension in his arms, the desperation in the way he moved. I couldn't trust him to stay calm. I couldn't let my guard down. The whole thing felt surreal. It felt like time had slowed down. Every second dragged on as I held him down. I remember wishing I could just hit him, just to make him stop moving. But I didn't know how much of that would make the situation worse. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the sirens. They were coming closer. The guy under me started to go limp, as if realizing the jig was up. He stopped trying to break free and just laid there, staring at the ceiling, still breathing heavily. The cops arrived soon after, taking him away in cuffs. They didn't ask me much, just took statements and then let me go. It was over just like that. But the tension lingered in the air, and I knew I'd never forget the feeling of his crazed eyes locked on me. The way he screamed when I opened that closet door. I still wish I'd hit him. The second experience happened about 2 years ago, and it was entirely different, but equally unsettling. I was by myself when it all went down. I had this idea to explore an old asylum in Connecticut. It had been abandoned for decades, but I had always been intrigued by places like that, old, decaying structures full of history, or whatever was left of it. It was November, cold as hell, and I wasn't exactly the smartest person at the time, deciding to go out there alone. But hey, I thought I could handle it. The place was eerie, of course. Most of the asylum had been overtaken by nature, vines creeping up the walls, the windows shattered and long since left open to the elements. The floors were covered in dirt and dust. You could tell this place had been untouched for a long time. I was moving quietly, trying to take it all in. My flashlight's beam flickered over the decay, making the place seem even more desolate. I didn't mind it. I was used to exploring places like this. It was kind of calming, in a weird way, the silence around me. But then I heard something. Footsteps. Running, to be exact. They weren't far behind me, and they sounded like they were coming from a hallway just around the corner. At first, I thought it was just kids, maybe some other explorers. No big deal. But the closer they got, the more unnerving it became. They didn't sound like normal footsteps. There was a certain urgency to them, a speed, like something or someone was chasing something else. It wasn't just kids running around. I shouted out, more out of reflex than anything else, trying to break the tension. "Hello? Anybody there?" Nothing. It got completely silent. For a second, the kind of silence you feel when your mind starts playing tricks on you. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I decided to move on, ignoring the strange sounds. But as I walked deeper into the building, I started hearing it again, closer this time. The sound of someone running behind me. Then, to my horror, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a laugh. It wasn't a kid's laugh. It was a deep, gravelly, almost mocking laugh. A grown man's laugh, but distorted sick. It echoed off the walls in a way that made it sound like it was coming from everywhere. I called out again, my voice shaking this time. "Who's there?" But there was no response. Just that eerie silence, followed by another laugh. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A crack in the wall. I wasn't sure what it was at first, but when I looked closer, I saw something I'll never forget. An eyeball. Just an eyeball, peering through the crack, staring straight at me. The eye was bloodshot, its pupil constricted, almost like it was squinting against the light. It blinked slowly, and it never looked away. I froze. My mind raced. The map of the building, the way out, all flashed through my head in an instant. I didn't know why, but something told me I needed to get out of there. And then that laugh came again. Close. It was so close it felt like it was in my ear. Without thinking, I turned and ran. I don't even know how long I ran. My feet were slamming against the floor, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't care if I got lost, or if I was running in circles. I just needed to get out of there, away from whatever that was. I didn't stop until I was back in my car. The whole drive home was a blur, my hands shaking on the wheel, my mind replaying that damn eyeball, that laugh. I haven't been back since. And honestly, I don't think I'll ever go back. Some things you just don't forget. I never thought much of the weird occurrences in my college dorm room. The lamp that flickered on and off by itself when I was studying. The strange sliding noises I'd hear in the middle of the night when I was trying to sleep. My roommate and I joked about it, half-heartedly dismissing it as some sort of weird electrical issue, or maybe even the stress of college life causing us to imagine things. We had a lot on our plates, midterms, papers, group projects. and the last thing we wanted was to add some sort of supernatural explanation to the mix. But the thing was, these little events, the things I could dismiss as nothing, they kept happening. And it was always when I was by myself. My roommate had her stuff, and while it didn't have the same level of activity, it was clear from the little things she had experienced that the room wasn't exactly normal. I remember one night, she had been out with some friends, and I was sitting at my desk working. My books and papers were scattered across it in a haphazard mess when, for no reason at all, one of my pens slowly rolled off the table and onto the floor. I thought I was imagining it. I hadn't bumped the desk, and there was no air to make it move. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just a freak occurrence. But over time, the little things built up. A book would fall off the shelf without any apparent reason. A drawer would open on its own. And then there was the lamp. It wasn't like I'd accidentally brushed it or had any reason to think it was faulty. It was an old desk lamp I'd had for years, and the switch was reliable. Yet, every now and then, it would turn on by itself in the middle of the night, bathing the room in its harsh glow. I'd lie there, frozen, staring at it, feeling that familiar unease creep up my spine, and I'd get up to turn it off. The next morning, it would be fine again. It was one of those things that, when it happened, made my heart race for a split second before I told myself it was nothing. Just some weird glitch in the universe that meant absolutely nothing. I'd pull my blanket up higher and close my eyes, trying to ignore it. It wasn't worth worrying over, not when I had a million other things to do. That all changed one afternoon. It was a Friday, and my roommate was heading out for the weekend, visiting some friends from home. I stayed behind to catch up on homework, knowing I had a long couple of days ahead of me. I had just finished a particularly long reading assignment for history class and decided to take a nap. My bed was raised slightly, giving me enough space to slide a chair underneath it. I made myself comfortable, setting my alarm for an hour later, and let my eyes fall shut. When I drifted off, my dreams felt normal at first. There were no strange creatures, no terrifying events, just the usual mix of errands and schoolwork. But then something shifted. I was walking through campus, heading to the library, when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. A figure, black as night, standing just outside the path I was walking. It wasn't clear at first, more like a shadow than a person. But as I walked closer, it slowly took shape. It was a tall figure, dressed all in black, its features hidden beneath the shadow. The thing that stood out the most were its eyes. Huge, gleaming white eyes that seemed to reflect the dim light around them. And its grin. That grin. It was wide, too wide, with jagged teeth like something out of a nightmare. I remember feeling that cold dread settle in my chest, that overwhelming sensation that this thing was not just a part of my dream. It had been following me for a long time, just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The moment I saw it, I knew it wasn't just a dream. It was real. Somehow, it had been there all along, lurking in the background of my life, watching me. I could feel its presence behind me, always just out of sight but never really gone. I couldn't explain it, but there was an eerie familiarity to it, like I'd known this thing for years, like it had always been there. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was quiet, and the lamp next to my bed flickered as it always did. But then I saw it, the figure. It was standing at the edge of my bed, just standing there, grinning at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing made sense. The figure was completely black, with its huge eyes and that unnerving smile. It didn't make any noise, didn't even shift its weight. It just stood there, staring at me. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperately wishing it would be gone when I opened them again. When I did, it was closer, much closer. It was on top of me now, pressing down on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. My whole body froze in panic as I gasped for air, feeling the weight of it on me, its eyes still glowing in the darkness. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like hours, like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare that wouldn't end. But finally, I managed to sit up, shoving it away with whatever strength I had left. I scrambled to my feet, still gasping for air, and turned on the lamp beside my bed. It clicked on, but then, almost as soon as the light filled the room, it flickered and turned off again. I froze, panic rising in my chest. I pressed the switch again, my hands trembling as I tried to turn it back on, but it wouldn't stay lit. The lamp flickered on and off in a maddening rhythm, and I could feel the creature's presence again, just behind me watching. I begged, pleading out loud in desperation. "Oh no, please no." I reached out, trying to turn the lamp on again, but it was useless. It wouldn't stay on. The room was dark again, and I was shaking, my heart pounding, feeling like I was losing control. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I ran. I didn't even think about what I was doing. I just bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop running until I was in the hallway, outside the door of my suite mate's room. I pounded on her door, my hands shaking uncontrollably. She was understanding, thank God. She listened as I told her what happened, the terror still fresh in my voice. She didn't laugh, didn't dismiss it. Instead, she gave me a small Buddha figure, telling me it was supposed to bring peace and protection. I didn't know if it would help, but I took it, clutching it tightly in my hand as I tried to calm my racing heart. I didn't tell anyone else what happened. It felt too weird, too unbelievable. Who would believe me? I wasn't sure I even believed it myself. But that night, I kept the lamp on, and I kept the Buddha figure by my side. Somehow, I felt a little safer, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking in the shadows, waiting. The next day, my other suite mate, who had been out all day and knew nothing of what had happened, came to me with a strange story. She had been in her room, with the door open, when she saw something in the hallway. A shadow. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the light, but then she realized it wasn't. It was a man, standing at the end of the hall, just staring at her. It didn't move, didn't say anything. It just stood there for a moment, watching her. Then, without warning, it turned and took a step toward my room. She didn't know what to make of it. She hadn't heard me scream or anything, but she said it was like the figure was headed straight for my door. She never saw it again, but the timing was strange. I had been napping at that very moment, when she saw it. She said it felt wrong, like it wasn't just some random person in the hall. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. But that night, I kept my lamp on, the Buddha figure beside me. And slowly, over time, the strange occurrences in the dorm room faded. The lamp stopped turning on and off by itself. The books stopped sliding across my desk. It was like whatever had been haunting the room had decided to leave. But I'll never forget that feeling, the dread, the heavy weight pressing down on me in the darkness. I don't know what it was, but I'm sure of one thing. It wasn't just in my head. It was real, and for a time, it had been following me. My mom was only 18 years old when this happened, and she was living in a small town in East Texas, where life moved at a slower pace, especially in the 1970s. It was a Friday night, and she had been out with friends at a party in the next town over. She told me the place was a little house just outside of town where everyone gathered after a long week. The music was loud, and the energy was high. People were dancing, laughing, and just letting go of all the stress of their small-town lives. My mom, at that age, was no different from the rest, carefree and full of energy. It had been a fun night, but by the time she left, it was already well past midnight. She didn't have anyone to drive her home, so she hopped into her old car and began the long drive back to their house, just a few miles outside of town. This was in a time when the roads weren't lit by streetlights every few feet. The highway she was on was deserted, and it seemed like there was nobody else around for miles. It was the middle of nowhere, typical for a small East Texas town. At around 2:30 a.m., the quiet drive back home was broken by the sudden appearance of headlights in her rearview mirror. She glanced in the mirror and saw a truck, about half a car length behind her. She didn't think much of it at first. It was a small highway, and maybe he was just driving the same way. But then the truck didn't pass. Instead, it stayed right on her tail, no matter how fast or slow she drove. The feeling hit her almost immediately. Something wasn't right. It wasn't that she hadn't driven at night before. It wasn't that she hadn't been on long, lonely stretches of road either. It was just the way this truck was following her. There was no reason for it. It was the dead of night, and there was no other traffic in sight. The truck had no reason to be that close, except to make her nervous. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel. She tried to shake it off, telling herself she was being paranoid, but she couldn't shake the feeling creeping up her spine. The headlights from the truck glared in her rearview mirror, blinding her to everything else. She could feel the weight of it, that oppressive pressure in her chest, like someone was pressing down on her. A few miles out from her house, she took the exit. It was a sharp curve off the main highway, a narrow road that led into a small neighborhood. Her house wasn't far from the turn, just a mile or so. She figured if the truck followed her off the exit, she could head into her neighborhood and get to a safe place. But sure enough, as soon as she made the turn, the truck was still there, right behind her, tailgating her the same way. The weight in her chest grew heavier. She didn't want to be followed all the way to her driveway. She didn't want to give this man the satisfaction of knowing where she lived, or worse, if he had any other intentions. It wasn't that she was scared of the truck, not really. It was the feeling she got, the way her instincts screamed at her that something was off. She didn't know what to do. What if the guy was just a harmless driver who wasn't thinking, or maybe didn't even realize how close he was? But then, what if he wasn't? What if he had bad intentions, and this wasn't just a coincidence? She drove a bit further, and when she got to a spot about a mile from her house, she decided it was time to act. There was a small stretch of road just before the neighborhood where there was a little pull-off. She steered her car to the side, her heart racing now, but she tried to stay calm. She turned off the headlights and locked the doors, hoping the truck would pass and leave her alone. But the truck didn't pass. Instead, it pulled right up behind her, the engine idling just inches from her rear bumper. She sat there frozen for what felt like hours. But in reality, it was probably only a couple of minutes. The only sound was the hum of her own heartbeat, pounding in her ears. She glanced in the side mirror and saw the truck's headlights still reflecting off the pavement, but there was no sign of movement. Then, she heard the door of the truck open. The sound of the truck's door creaking on its hinges made her stomach drop. She held her breath, the weight of the fear pressing down on her chest like a 1,000-pound stone. The sound of footsteps followed. Slow, deliberate steps. Each step seemed to echo, despite the stillness of the night. Her heart was pounding so loudly that she could barely hear anything else, but she could feel the hairs on her neck stand up. The man was coming toward her car. Her eyes darted to the side mirror again, and she could see the man getting closer. He was holding something in his hand, something long and shiny. She couldn't see it clearly, but the shape in the mirror was unmistakable. He had a knife, or some kind of weapon. Her blood turned cold. She had no doubt now. He wasn't just following her, he was going to hurt her. Her mind raced. What should she do? She thought about running, but where could she go? There was no one around, no houses, no lights. She thought about staying in the car, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. She couldn't let him get close enough to break the window or force the door open. The man was getting closer, and now he was right at the driver's side door. She could hear his boots scraping on the asphalt as he reached the car, his footsteps stopping just a few feet from where she sat. The door handle rattled. The sound made her stomach drop lower than it had ever been. Her hand hovered over the gear shift. She was shaking, but she knew she couldn't freeze. Not now. The man's hand gripped the door handle, and for a split second, she thought he was going to pull it open. In that moment, she made a decision. She slammed her foot on the gas, the engine roaring to life, and the car surged forward. She didn't even look back as she peeled out of there, tearing down the road, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't slow down until she reached the safety of her neighborhood. By then, the truck was nowhere in sight. She could still feel the adrenaline rushing through her veins, but it was starting to fade. She finally took a breath and realized that she had made it. She had escaped. She pulled into the driveway, still trembling, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight that her knuckles were white. She didn't even bother to turn the car off at first. She just sat there, staring at the headlights of her house, making sure everything was still okay. When she finally opened the door and stepped out, the night air felt colder than it had before. She didn't tell anyone about the truck right away. It wasn't until years later, when I was a teenager, that she finally opened up to me. She told me this story one night, after I'd started going out with my friends more. She didn't want to scare me, but she knew I was getting older, and the world was becoming a little more dangerous. She told me she was sure the man had been following her for a reason. He had a weapon, and he had been getting closer, no matter how much she tried to ignore it. And if she hadn't acted when she did, she didn't know what would have happened. It still shook her to think about it. She never drove the same way home again, always taking a different route if she could. I'll never forget the way she looked when she told me that story. Her face had changed, the weight of that night still heavy on her shoulders. And when I think about it now, every time I get in the car to go somewhere, I remember what she taught me. Always trust your gut. Always stay alert. And never let your guard down, no matter how familiar or safe the world around you seems. That night could have ended much worse. But somehow, against the odds, she made it out of there. We were just like any other group of friends who had an odd hobby. Most people in their free time went to the movies, or out to dinner, or got together for game nights. We did that too, of course, but we had a weird interest in abandoned places. Some people called it an obsession, some people just thought we were idiots. But no matter how you looked at it, it was a hobby, and it gave us a reason to hang out every weekend. We weren't your typical ghost hunters. We didn't carry around fancy equipment, nor did we have any delusions that we were going to find something supernatural. It was just for fun. That said, the paranormal interest was real, at least in the sense that we liked to get spooked. Sometimes, though, things happened that made you question if there was something beyond our understanding, but I'll get to that. We had been doing it for about 3 years at this point, roaming through old houses, spooky woods, abandoned hospitals, and the like. You name it, we probably went there. We had our favorites, the places with the weirdest histories, or the ones that felt just a little too off. There was one spot we frequented more than the rest, though, a cemetery. I know it sounds cliché, but there was something about that cemetery that kept drawing us in. It wasn't one of those tidy, well-maintained places with neat rows of gravestones. No, this was old and overgrown, the kind that hadn't seen much care for decades. Headstones had cracked and tilted, some even fallen over. We weren't there because we thought it was haunted. It just had an atmosphere that made it feel like it could be. The cemetery had an odd little section near the edge where the land dropped into a clearing, a sort of natural amphitheater. You could almost imagine the land was shaped that way intentionally, though it probably wasn't. The ground was covered with dead brush, and there were remnants of old flowers and reeds scattered around, pieces of grief that time had forgotten. The air always felt thicker in that spot, like something about it was constantly shifting, just out of sight. It's hard to explain, but after visiting so many times, we started to feel like we knew the place. Every visit felt like there was something we couldn't quite put our finger on, like the place was different every time we came. It wasn't a huge difference, but just enough to make you feel unsettled. On this particular visit, we had a new guy with us, someone who was eager to get in on the fun. And of course, we had our friend who loved to take photos, the one who spent half the night snapping hundreds of pictures of everything, no matter how insignificant it seemed. The rest of us didn't really care about the pictures. We were there for the vibe, for the exploration, and yeah, for a little bit of the thrill that came with creeping around places most people wouldn't even think of stepping into. So there we were, standing at the top of this natural auditorium, smoking, looking for our friend who was off taking photos somewhere in the cemetery. The air had that weird thickness to it, as always. I could hear the rustling of the wind in the trees, the sound of leaves scraping across the ground. It was quiet, but not in the peaceful way you'd think. It was the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. I remember it vividly, the way I kept glancing around, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. Then, out of nowhere, it appeared. At first, it was just a shape, a glowing, amber figure that seemed to float out of one tree, cross the clearing, and disappear into another. It wasn't solid in the way you'd expect something to be. It was more like a presence, or maybe a distortion in the air itself. The kind of thing you couldn't quite focus on, but it was undeniably there. I remember standing there, frozen for a few seconds, just watching. My mind was trying to process it, but it wasn't quite working. I was holding my camera at the time, but my brain was too slow to even think about taking a photo. It was like everything about it, its glow, its movement, the way it disappeared, was just so unexpected that it short-circuited my ability to react. I wasn't scared, per se, but I was definitely confused and a little unsettled. It wasn't like a ghost, or anything you might have seen in a movie. It didn't have a face, or any details you could define. Just this glowing, amber hue. It didn't linger long enough for me to even blink, and by the time I thought to raise my camera, it was gone. It had just crossed the clearing and disappeared into the trees on the other side. I don't even know how to describe it properly. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen. But what was really weird, and this is where things started to get unsettling, was the fact that not all of us saw the same thing. My buddy, who had been standing right next to me, didn't see the same glowing amber figure. He described it as a mass of static lines, like the interference you get on a television when the signal goes out. Angry, jagged lines of static that seemed to pulse in and out of focus. It was almost like it was glitching, but not in a normal way. My brain tried to process that too, but it was harder. How could we both be seeing such different things? Then there was the new guy. He didn't see anything at all. Now, before you think I'm jumping to conclusions or getting too caught up in the moment, I've tried to rationalize it. I've even read a bit about how pressure changes or electromagnetic fields could cause your brain to perceive things differently, like causing certain neurons to fire in the occipital lobe or the optic nerve. That could explain why different people see different things in the same place. Maybe it was just a trick of the mind, some weird atmospheric disturbance. But I still haven't looked into it fully. Maybe I will one day. We stood there for a while after that, in stunned silence. The new guy, completely unaware of what had happened, just kept walking around the cemetery, snapping his pictures. The rest of us were still processing what we'd just seen, or thought we'd seen. And it's not like we could talk about it with him, since he hadn't experienced anything. In fact, he probably thought we were all a little crazy, standing around and staring at nothing. Eventually, we headed back to the car, and by then, the excitement had turned into something else, a strange kind of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the place had changed, even if I couldn't figure out exactly what. The weird thing was, the more I thought about it, the less sure I was about what I had actually seen. The amber figure, the static lines, the fact that only some of us saw it, it all started to feel surreal, like a memory that you couldn't fully trust. When we got home that night, we went through the photos the guy with the camera had taken. There were hundreds of them, each one more detailed than the last. Some of them had eerie lighting, others seemed to have odd shadows, but nothing that explained what we had just experienced. No glowing figures, no strange static lines, nothing out of the ordinary. But still, it felt like something had been there. Something that we couldn't explain. We talked about it briefly the next week, but the conversation never went anywhere. The new guy didn't seem to care much, and our friend with the camera didn't want to talk about it at all. I guess I wouldn't either if I had been the one who didn't see anything. But the three of us who had seen it were left with that weird, gnawing feeling that we'd experienced something together. And yet, we couldn't fully agree on what it had been. I don't know what it was that night. Maybe we were all just tired, or maybe something in the atmosphere had played tricks on us. But every time I think back to that cemetery, I remember that feeling, that quiet, unsettling sensation that something was different. Like there was something waiting to be discovered, or something that wanted to be left alone. And no matter how many times I go back to the cemetery after that, it never quite feels the same. When I was 8 years old, my entire family gathered at my aunt's house for Christmas. We didn't live too far from her, maybe a 30-minute drive through the city, but every year it felt like a little adventure because of how packed the house would get. My family is big, Hispanic, noisy, loud, loving, and full of tradition. Aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, friends of cousins. Some people I didn't even recognize anymore, but was told we were related. The kind of gathering where you could barely move from one room to the next without bumping into someone holding a plate of tamales, or a kid sprinting by with a toy they got as a gift. Laughter bounced off the walls, music blasted from both the downstairs living room and the upstairs den, and the kitchen was pure chaos. You'd have to raise your voice just to ask someone to pass the salt. All the lights were on. I mean all of them. Every room, even the guest rooms, even closets. I guess that was kind of normal for us. My aunt liked having everything lit up during Christmas. It made the house feel alive, she said. I remember the smell of roasted pork, spicy mole, and cinnamon-laced desserts floating through the air like something you could bite into. People were everywhere, sitting on stairs, the backs of couches, the floor. Kids unwrapping gifts, adults laughing over beers and tequila, and music keeping everyone in rhythm. I stayed mostly with the younger kids, bouncing between video games and trying to sneak extra dessert from the kitchen when nobody was looking. By around 1 in the morning, the energy hadn't slowed down much. If anything, it had hit a second wind. Someone put on a playlist full of old cumbias, and the dancing had started again. Then, without warning, the power cut out. It wasn't like a flicker. Everything just went black. All the lights died at the same time. The music stopped mid-beat, and all that was left was the sound of people shuffling around and murmuring in confusion. It was like someone had hit a switch and drained the life out of the house. In a matter of seconds, the noise and movement dropped to near silence, like everyone was holding their breath. No one screamed. It wasn't scary at first, just confusing. I stood in the hallway next to my cousins, waiting for someone to laugh and say they tripped a breaker with all the Christmas lights and cooking going on. But no one did. Then came the questions, the flashlight apps turning on, the theories. Some of the uncles said maybe it was the whole block. Someone peeked outside and confirmed other houses still had lights. That's when people started assuming the issue was in the house. A few folks headed outside to check the exterior breakers, but someone mentioned the fuse box was in the cellar. I had never been down there before. The door to it was in the kitchen, behind a swinging pantry door. Everyone usually stayed out of there unless they were grabbing something from storage. My uncle, my dad's younger brother, volunteered to check it. For some reason, maybe because I was standing nearby, I offered to go with him. I think I just wanted to feel useful, to be part of the moment like the older kids. We walked through the kitchen, using the flashlight from his phone to light the way. The house was still dark and quiet, and every step felt heavier. The door to the cellar was old. It creaked when he opened it. The staircase was narrow and wooden, with no railing, just a wall on one side and a steep drop on the other. He went first, holding the phone in one hand and trailing his other hand along the wall. I followed behind, placing my hand gently on his right shoulder for guidance. The cellar was colder than I expected. It didn't feel like the rest of the house. Even with all the people upstairs, it was like the temperature dropped 5 or 10 degrees the moment we hit the bottom step. The air smelled different too. Musty, a mix of damp concrete and dust. The floor beneath us was hard, probably cement, and uneven in places. I could hear our shoes scuffing against it as we moved. The beam from his phone wasn't strong, and most of the cellar stayed swallowed in blackness. There was a small rectangular window on the far end of the room, but it let in no light. Just pure dark outside. No streetlight, no moonlight. Just pitch black. We could barely see a few feet ahead. Everything beyond that felt like a wall of shadow. As we moved further in, I kept my hand on his shoulder, not wanting to lose track of him. My eyes tried to adjust, but it was impossible to make out any shapes or landmarks around us. All I could hear was our breathing, our footsteps, and then, a sound ahead of us. Something moved. It wasn't loud, just a soft shuffle or scrape. We both paused. I could feel his shoulder tense up under my hand. It didn't sound close, but it was enough to make us stop for a second. We stood there listening. Nothing followed, just the silence again. He mumbled something about rats or mice, although not loud, just enough to justify it in his own head. And we kept moving. 5 more steps forward, and he suddenly froze. I felt it right away because my hand was still on him. He didn't move for a full second. Then he turned slightly and asked if I had just slapped him. His voice was tense, low, confused. I hadn't. I told him no. I was right behind him. My hand never left his shoulder. I didn't hear a slap. I didn't feel one. If he had been slapped on the back, I should have heard the impact in the quiet. I should have felt some kind of jolt through him. But I didn't. He was dead serious, though. Said it felt sharp, sudden, like the flat of someone's hand hitting his back hard. We stood there again in the dark, not sure what to think, before he shook it off and kept going. A couple minutes later, we found the fuse box. He opened the panel and started flipping switches. One by one, lights started flickering on upstairs. We could hear the hum of music returning, people cheering. The warmth of the house came back almost immediately. It was like nothing had happened. My uncle closed the box and we climbed back up the stairs, the cellar behind us disappearing into black again as the door shut. For the rest of the night, the party continued like nothing had happened. People went back to dancing, drinking, eating. Kids tore open more presents, and the adults moved on to arguing about politics or sports. But my uncle seemed off. He kept rubbing his back, twisting around like he couldn't get comfortable. At first, he thought he'd just pulled a muscle, or maybe caught a draft down in the cellar, but it didn't go away. His wife finally got him to lift his shirt so she could check. What she found shut the room up. There was a clear red handprint on his back. Big, way bigger than my hand or hers. The fingers were long, stretched out, the palm broad. It sat right over his left shoulder blade and crossed over his spine, like someone had slapped him hard from behind and left a mark. It was dark red, like an irritated rash or a sunburn, and slightly raised. He said it stung a little, but mostly just tingled, like that numb, prickly feeling you get when your leg falls asleep. Everyone gathered around to look. People took turns inspecting it, trying to rationalize. Maybe he'd leaned against something hot, but there was nothing hot in the cellar. No radiators, no heating vents, no exposed wires. Maybe he had brushed against a pipe or scraped himself. But the mark wasn't scratched or bruised. It was a handprint, too perfect to be random, too exact. It didn't make sense. I kept thinking about my position behind him, how my hand never left his shoulder, how close I was. If something had gotten close enough to slap him, I should have noticed. I should have heard it. I should have felt it. But I didn't. There was nothing but the sound of our shoes, our breath, and that brief shuffle ahead of us. Some of the older folks started whispering about spirits, demons, la sombra negra, things I'd heard about in stories growing up, the kind of tales people told to scare kids into behaving. I remember my grandmother making the sign of the cross and muttering under her breath. My aunt lit a candle and left it on the kitchen counter the rest of the night. I didn't know what to make of it. I wanted a logical explanation. I still do. I've played it over in my head hundreds of times. The steps we took, how close I was, how nothing made a sound, how the mark was fresh and red, and how there was no chance anyone else had been down there. No footsteps, no voice, no sign of another person. The next morning, the handprint was still there, though it had faded some. By the second day, it was almost gone. Just a light redness, like a fading bruise. No one ever figured out what caused it. My uncle laughed it off eventually, though he still remembered it clearly. He'd joke about getting slapped by a ghost every Christmas, but he never really liked talking about it for long. Said it gave him chills. I noticed he never went back into that cellar again, at least not when I was around. I guess the strangest part wasn't the mark itself. It was the fact that something could reach in between two people standing shoulder to shoulder in complete darkness, do something like that, and leave no other trace. No sound, no movement, no warmth or breeze, just a cold slap and a red handprint. Like whatever did it didn't need space or sound or explanation. It just existed for that one moment and then vanished again. That night taught me something I still haven't shaken. Sometimes it's not about what you see or hear. It's about what you don't. The silence, the stillness, the gap between what should happen and what does. And sometimes, no matter how much light you bring back, there's still a part of the dark that doesn't let go. I had just returned from a spontaneous camping trip in northern Minnesota only a few days ago, but the memories of that day still weigh heavily on my mind. I went with a small group of friends, all of us relatively familiar with the area and excited to explore more of the natural world. The trip was supposed to be nothing out of the ordinary, just a quick retreat into the woods, a place to disconnect and enjoy the wilderness. But something happened during the walk back that still lingers with me, a feeling I can't shake. It's been eating at me, and I'm not sure if I'll ever truly understand it. The day had started like any other. We had hiked through the dense, sprawling forests, the sun barely poking through the canopy above. The trees were tall and ancient, their trunks wrapped in thick layers of moss, and the air smelled like wet earth and pine. As much as I loved the outdoors, I had always carried with me a slight unease, an undercurrent of superstition that kept me on edge when it came to the unknown corners of the wilderness. But this trip had been uneventful so far. There were no eerie sounds in the night, no strange happenings, just the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. However, as we began our journey back, the mood shifted. By then, I was exhausted. I hadn't gotten much sleep the night before, and my muscles ached from the long trek we had been on. I was at the back of the group, trying to push myself to keep up, but the fatigue made every step feel heavier than the last. My legs burned, and the mud was sticking to my boots. With every step, I grew more aware of how much I had fallen behind. It wasn't too bad at first. I could still hear the chatter of the people ahead of me, the soft rustling of their movements. I told myself it was fine, that I wasn't alone, that I'd catch up soon. But as we ventured deeper into the dense vegetation, the path became more difficult to follow. Thick bushes and branches crowded the way, and the occasional mud patch slowed me down even more. Eventually, I lost sight of the person ahead of me. I wasn't panicking yet. It wasn't that big of a deal. After all, it was only 10 a.m., and I could hear them fairly well still. I called out a few times, just to make sure they were still within earshot, but all I received was muffled responses that sounded distant and unclear. I chalked it up to the trees and the thick underbrush between us, convinced they were simply further ahead than I thought. I kept trudging forward, my feet sinking into the wet ground with each step. But after another 20 minutes, I began to feel uneasy. The The sounds I had been hearing from my friends became sporadic, fading in and out as if the wind was playing tricks on me. It was strange. The further I went, the less I heard. It was as if the woods had suddenly swallowed up all sound. I couldn't hear the birds or the wind anymore. Just the sound of my own breathing and the squelch of my boots in the mud. A chill ran through me. "Hey, slow down," I shouted, my voice a little more desperate this time. My throat felt dry, and my words echoed strangely in the quiet. But the response I got was faint, and too far away. I strained my ears to catch any hint of movement from ahead, but there was nothing. I tried again, louder this time, calling out into the stillness, but there was no answer. I felt a creeping sense of panic begin to gnaw at me. My heart rate quickened, and my legs, already sore, felt even heavier now, as though they were made of lead. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. I should have been able to catch up by now. The path wasn't that long, and I knew the way. I knew I wasn't lost, but something was wrong. I told myself I was being irrational, that I was just tired and my nerves were getting the best of me. I tried to calm down, telling myself that everything was fine, that I just needed to push forward and everything would be okay. But every step I took, the fear crept a little higher. The air felt dense, the trees too close, like they were watching me. My instincts told me I wasn't alone. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving just beyond my line of sight. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just the wildlife, or maybe my mind was playing tricks. But I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking behind me. I kept moving, my senses on high alert, but every step felt like it was taking me further into the unknown. The sounds of the forest had completely disappeared. The silence was suffocating. The only noise now was the thudding of my heart and the ragged breath in my chest. By the time 30 minutes had passed, I was beyond scared. I was completely disoriented. My phone was off, its battery low, and my watch had frozen at 11:05 a.m. It didn't make sense. How had so much time passed? How could I have gotten so turned around? I had to sit down. The exhaustion was unbearable, and I couldn't keep going like this. I needed to rest. I pulled off my pack and sat down on the muddy trail, trying to take a few deep breaths. My hands were trembling, and I could feel the sweat dripping down my neck. I reached into my pack and grabbed a granola bar, hoping the small burst of energy would help me pull myself together. As I ate, I tried to gather my thoughts, but every time I closed my eyes for a moment, the unease crept back, more intense than before. I yelled out again, hoping my friends would hear me. But there was no response, just the same eerie silence. I called again, my voice weak and hoarse. Still nothing. I looked at my watch again. 11:05 a.m. My stomach twisted. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my chest, a mix of fear and confusion. That's when I heard the rustling behind me. I froze, heart slamming in my chest. I whipped around, nearly losing my balance on the slick ground. My breath caught in my throat as I searched the path behind me. At first, I saw nothing, just the endless expanse of trees and shrubs. But then, through the thick foliage, I saw them. My friends, appearing out of nowhere, walking toward me, looking just as confused as I felt. I blinked in disbelief. How was that possible? I had been ahead of them, hadn't I? I had been walking for what felt like hours, but here they were only 10 feet away, looking as though they had just rounded a bend. I couldn't process it at first. I laughed, hysterical and unsure, my mind still racing with confusion. "Why are you ahead of us?" one of them asked, genuinely puzzled. I didn't know how to respond. I couldn't explain what had just happened. I tried to, but the words wouldn't come out right. My mind felt foggy, disconnected. All I could do was stare at the ground, trying to steady my breathing. I looked back at them, trying to make sense of it all. They were all in the same group, looking at me with concern. I had no idea how I had ended up ahead of them, and the strangest part was that they hadn't been more than 10 minutes behind me. One of them pulled out a watch, showing me the time. It was 10:15 a.m. 10 minutes. That didn't make sense. I glanced down at my own watch, still frozen on 11:42 a.m. How was that possible? I felt sick to my stomach. I couldn't explain the time discrepancy. I wanted to say it was just a malfunction, that it was all in my head. Maybe it was, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something beyond just my exhaustion and nerves. I didn't dwell on it for too long, though. All I could think about was getting out of there. We didn't waste any more time. We packed up and moved as quickly as we could, not saying much on the walk back. We were all tired, and the strange disorientation had cast a heavy shadow over everything. The rest of the hike was quiet, but the sense of unease never left me. We made it back to the car, but the fear and confusion lingered. I still can't explain what happened that day. Was it just fatigue or something more? I can't shake the feeling that I'm not fully aware of what occurred out there in those woods. I've read about things like lost time, but I'm not sure if I believe in it. All I know is that for a few hours, I was lost in a way that doesn't make sense, and no matter how much I try to convince myself otherwise, the strange feeling lingers. It was around 3:30 in the morning, the time when the building felt the emptiest, and the hum of activity had died down for the night. I worked the overnight shift, from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m., in a large office building on the 14th floor. The whole place would be silent by that time, with just a few people scattered around working late. I'd be there in the quiet hours, alone but not entirely alone. After hours of staring at the same screen, I usually found myself taking a break, mostly to try and get a little rest before the second half of my shift. I didn't mind it much, though it could get unnerving at times. On my lunch breaks, I'd head down to the second floor of the building to catch a quick nap. The second floor was practically deserted during the night, save for a few lights that flickered on automatically as you moved through the hallways. It was perfect for what I needed, a quiet, cold, empty space, away from the normal bustle of the office. The lights would turn off and on with motion sensors, and there was a long corridor that ran the length of the building, with plush chairs lined up in a waiting area near the conference rooms. If I arranged 2 chairs just right, I could lie back comfortably. It was the best place to rest, even though the lights in that area were wired strangely. They were always on, except for when you walked into the space. Then they turned off. Not the best for napping, but if I positioned myself correctly, I could cover my eyes and fall asleep before the lights came back on. This particular night was colder than usual. The building had shut off the heating for the winter months, so the temperature had dropped to an uncomfortable level. I had worn a thick jacket to help combat the cold, and I used it as a blanket. After a few minutes of making my little bed on the chairs, I was ready to close my eyes. It was the perfect temperature to sleep, the quiet around me only interrupted by the occasional hum of city traffic outside. I was already drifting off when I heard something. Footsteps, quiet but distinct, moving toward the corner of the hallway where I was lying. I heard keys jingling softly, the metallic clink almost echoing off the walls. I didn't think much of it at first. It was probably just a janitor or another employee coming through the hallway to check on things. The sound of footsteps and jingling keys was something that had become background noise for me by then. As the footsteps got closer, I didn't move. I was already lying down, and I didn't want to get caught sleeping on the job, so I stayed as still as I could. The footsteps were getting closer. I listened carefully, waiting for the sound to pass, for the janitor or whoever it was to continue down the hall and move away. But then something strange happened. Instead of the footsteps moving away, they stopped. The jingling of keys stopped too. I listened intently, trying to figure out where the person had gone. Maybe they'd seen me and stopped to wait for me to wake up? I wasn't sure, but I waited. The seconds turned to minutes, and the sound never came closer. The footsteps stayed the same distance away, as if someone had just stopped. I was trying to make sense of it when the lights above me flickered, briefly turning off. The motion sensors had activated, but only the ones near the corner. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, but I stayed still, trying to act as if I hadn't noticed the sudden silence and the stillness in the hallway. Maybe I was imagining things. But then the lights flickered again, and that's when I realized the footsteps hadn't stopped. They hadn't moved away. The person had been standing there, right around the corner. The jingling of the keys continued, but it sounded like the person was just pacing in place, marching with the keys jangling rhythmically, not moving forward. The noise was so consistent that I began to wonder what was going on. Was this person trying to mess with me? It didn't make sense. Why would anyone stand there and jingle keys for no reason? I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to figure out what was happening. I was trying to work up the courage to look over, to see what was going on, but my body felt heavy. I was paralyzed, not in the way I usually felt when I was so exhausted that I could barely move, but in a way that felt unnatural. Something wasn't right. My eyes still refused to open fully. but I could see just enough to catch the flicker of lights again. Something shifted in the hallway, like the sound of something moving in the dark. It wasn't the janitor or anyone I recognized. I tried to shift my body, to roll over and see what was happening, but my muscles felt locked in place. My arms and legs wouldn't move, no matter how hard I tried. I couldn't speak. I couldn't open my eyes all the way. Suddenly, there was a click, and the lights above me went completely dark. The hallway, which had been illuminated by faint streetlights outside, was now pitch black, and the only sound I could hear was the keys, still jingling, getting louder. They were coming closer. I felt a sudden weight, like someone had climbed on top of me, pressing down on my chest. The keys were now on top of me, the sound of the keys jangling like they were right on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I felt suffocated. The pressure on my chest was like something heavy, too heavy for me to lift. It was as though the air itself had thickened, and I couldn't draw in a breath. I panicked. My heart was racing in my chest, my head spinning. I tried to scream, to shout for help, but nothing came out. I struggled to lift my arms, but they felt like lead. My body wouldn't respond to any of my commands. It was as if I was trapped in my own skin, unable to move, unable to fight back against whatever was on top of me. The pressure on my chest grew heavier. I could feel the keys digging into me, the weight of them pressing down with an unnatural force. My body felt like it was being pinned to the ground, completely helpless. I thought I was going to suffocate. The sound of the keys jingling got louder, and it was as though I could feel them pressing into my chest, not just hearing them anymore. It felt like this went on for an eternity. The seconds, minutes, whatever it was, stretched on, each one more unbearable than the last. My breathing was shallow, my body covered in a cold sweat. But just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the weight suddenly lifted. It was gone, as if whatever had been holding me down had disappeared. I opened my eyes a crack, barely able to see the hallway through the slits of my eyelids. The footsteps had stopped, the jingling of keys fading as they retreated back around the corner. The lights flickered back on, harsh and bright, illuminating the empty hallway. I slowly lifted my head, my neck sore from being frozen in place. I was still lying in the same spot, but something was wrong. The chairs I had arranged so carefully behind the pillar, the ones I had used as a little makeshift bed, were gone. They had been moved. The chairs were now pushed out into the middle of the hallway, their positions completely wrong, exposed to anyone walking by. I sat up quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no sign of the person, no footsteps, no keys. The lights above me buzzed steadily, filling the hall with their artificial glow. The hum of the lights was the only sound in the stillness. My head was spinning, and my chest felt tight as I looked around. I was drenched in sweat. I grabbed my jacket and wiped my face, trying to steady myself. When I pulled the jacket away from my face, I froze. The lights had been off a moment ago, but now, as I looked around, I was back in my original spot. The chairs I had been sleeping on had been moved. I hadn't gotten up. It was as if the whole thing had never happened, but I knew it had. I had felt it. I had experienced it. I could hear a low droning sound, a hum of electricity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I grabbed my things quickly, stuffed my jacket into my bag, and bolted out of the hallway, my heart still racing. My legs were unsteady as I made my way back to the elevator. I didn't look back. I couldn't explain it. I knew it wasn't normal. I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural things. I had experienced sleep paralysis before, and maybe that was all it was, a nightmare mixed with something physical, but Jesus Christ, it felt so real. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there with me, pressing down on me, even if I couldn't see it. When I got back upstairs to my desk, I tried to calm myself, telling myself that it was just a bad experience. But later, when I mentioned it to a coworker, he told me something that sent a chill down my spine. He said that someone had died in the building during construction, a worker who had committed suicide. Some people had reported hearing strange noises late at night, like jingling keys, and seeing things in the empty rooms. I laughed it off. Of course I did. I didn't believe in that stuff. But as he said, people are stupid, man. They've heard the keys jingling and everything. Morons. It was a strange thing to say. I didn't have an answer for him, and I still don't. All I know is that night was the most terrifying experience I've ever had, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened, it wasn't just in my head. It was something real. I was home alone that day, just trying to get some things done around the house. It was a quiet afternoon in our little town on the high plains. Despite it being a small place with only a couple thousand people, it still had a lot of life to it. The sort of place where everyone knew everyone, and things were usually pretty calm. Our house was right smack in the middle of town, and we'd been there for a while. It was a decent place, nothing fancy, but it had a lot of character. The kind of house where the screen door doesn't lock properly, and the big wooden door, well, it doesn't always close all the way. It was the kind of house where you didn't really have to worry about much, other than the usual things, like fixing a broken lock or getting the dog to stop barking at the mailman. My dog was always a handful. She was small, but she had a big personality and a bigger bark. If there was one thing she loved more than anything, it was chasing squirrels. That was her arch nemesis, her sworn enemy. It didn't matter how many times I'd tried to call her back or tell her to stop. The second she saw a squirrel darting across the yard, all common sense went out the window. She'd shoot out that door like a rocket, barking up a storm, and I'd be standing there helpless, trying to call her back before she got into too much trouble. That afternoon, I was sitting in the living room, zoning out a bit, when I heard it, her barking. It started off normal, the kind of barking she did when she saw a squirrel, but it quickly escalated into that frantic, high-pitched barking she only did when she was really worked up. I jumped up and ran to the door, figuring she was out there going after some poor unsuspecting rodent again. I opened the door, half expecting to see her trying to catch a squirrel up in the big tree near the backyard. But what I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. Instead of a squirrel, there was a bear climbing up the tree. I froze for a second, just staring at the bear, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I had lived in the area long enough to know that bears weren't exactly uncommon, but they weren't something you usually saw in the middle of town, especially not so close to where I lived. The bear was only about 15 feet up the tree, just sitting there, looking down at my dog like it had no idea what to do next. My dog, of course, didn't care that this was a real, honest-to-God bear. She was still barking like crazy, charging the base of the tree, as if she were some sort of fearless lion tamer. I had to act fast. I knew that bear wasn't going to stay up there forever, and the last thing I wanted was for my dog to get hurt, or worse, for me to get caught in the middle of something that could turn dangerous in a second. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind racing through every possible scenario. The only thing I could think to do was get my dog and get her out of there. I crept forward, taking slow steps toward the base of the tree, keeping my eye on the bear. I knew that any sudden movements could set it off, and I didn't want to be anywhere near a bear if it decided to come down in a panic. My dog was still barking her head off, oblivious to the danger she was in. I reached out, trying to grab her collar, inching closer with every step. I was less than a foot away from her when everything went wrong. Without any warning, the bear freaked out. It didn't just climb down like I thought it would. Instead, it jumped straight down from the tree, right toward me. I barely had time to react. I could feel the air rush around me as the bear fell, its massive body just missing me by a hair. I could even feel the brush of its fur against my skin as it landed nearby. My heart was in my throat, and for a split second, I couldn't even process what had just happened. 1 second, I was inches away from a wild bear, and the next it was bolting away from me in a panic, heading toward the backyard. But my dog, she wasn't about to let this bear get away that easily. She was still barking and running after it like she could chase it down. The bear was clearly terrified, and it wasn't interested in fighting. Its only instinct was to get away as fast as it could, but that didn't help me much. The bear was headed straight for the backyard, and my dog was hot on its tail, yapping all the way. I ran after them, my mind racing. The backyard was mostly fenced in at that point, but the fence wasn't quite finished, not enough to keep a bear from finding its way through. There was a small opening at one end of the yard, and I could see that the bear was starting to circle around, getting confused. It didn't know how to get out, and that made it even more dangerous. If it felt cornered, it might lash out. I kept screaming at my dog, trying to get her to stop, but she was too focused on the bear. I could see the panic in its eyes, and I couldn't help but feel for it. Bears don't belong in backyards, especially not with a dog chasing them. But in that moment, all I could think about was getting the bear out of there before it decided to defend itself. The last thing I wanted was for my dog to get hurt. I chased them both around the yard, yelling, waving my arms, trying to herd the bear out the opening in the fence. The bear was running in circles now, completely panicked, and I was starting to lose track of where I was. I could hear my dog barking relentlessly, and every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of the bear, its big brown body darting around in the corner of my vision. I don't know how long it went on, but it felt like forever. Time seemed to stretch out, every second dragging on. My heart was pounding, my adrenaline was pumping, and I couldn't let up. I had to get that bear out before things went from bad to worse. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw an opening. The bear had slowed down, its confusion giving way to exhaustion. I made a final push, running toward it with my dog still barking behind me, and I was able to get it to move toward the fence opening. The bear hesitated for a moment, then bolted through the gap, disappearing into the woods beyond. I stood there for a second, breathless and shaken. My heart was still racing, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The bear was gone, my dog was safe, and somehow I had survived a close call. As I stood there, trying to catch my breath, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were trucks lining the road, their headlights cutting through the darkness, and I could see neighbors standing outside, pointing and staring at me. They had been watching the whole thing unfold from the road. My face flushed with embarrassment. I had just had a full-on showdown with a bear, and now everyone knew about it. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, looking at the neighbors, still trying to process what had just happened. I looked down at my dog, who was still barking, oblivious to the chaos she'd just caused. I couldn't help but laugh, though it was a nervous laugh. I had just chased a bear out of my backyard, and I wasn't even sure how to feel about it. The neighbors started to disperse, going back to their cars, probably heading home after watching what had turned into a small-town spectacle. The bear was long gone, but the adrenaline was still coursing through my veins. I walked back inside, closing the door behind me, and leaned against it for a moment, trying to calm down. I couldn't believe it had actually happened, especially in the most populated part of the county. But in that moment, I was just grateful. Grateful that I hadn't lost my dog, and grateful that I hadn't found myself in a situation that could have turned much worse. It was crazy, no doubt about it, but I made it through. And when I look back on it, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. I'd faced down a bear, and somehow I had come out the other side in one piece. Back when I was in college, about 7 years ago now, I had to move out of my apartment at the very last minute. I'd like to say it was due to some emergency, but really, it was just because I was lazy and hadn't planned anything. My lease ended in early May, and somehow I'd managed to avoid thinking about it until the last week of April. I had no backup plan, no storage unit booked, nothing lined up. My parents were in town visiting, and they offered to help me figure it out, which I was incredibly grateful for. I was already stressed out with finals and the end of the semester chaos, and I didn't want to end up sleeping in my car or crashing on someone's floor all summer. We got lucky, or at least it felt like we did at the time. My mom found this listing online for a basement apartment literally across the street from the university. It was in a small, older brick house that had clearly been chopped up into rental units. The ad said it was a 4-room basement apartment, already furnished, and the landlord was offering a discount because the previous tenant had canceled last minute. My parents were thrilled. Cheap, convenient, already furnished. To them, it was a godsend. To me, it was just a solution. I just wanted somewhere to throw my stuff and crash for the 3 months of summer classes. I remember walking in for the first time. The landlord was this older man, polite but a little stiff. He didn't talk much. He walked us through the place and handed me the keys right after. That was it. The layout was straightforward. The main room was kind of a combination of a living room and dining space. There was an old but decently clean sofa bed, a small round table with 2 wooden chairs, a tiny TV on a stand in the corner. To the right, through an open doorway, was the kitchen, narrow, barely enough room for one person to move around. Past the kitchen was the bathroom, small, with a weird pinkish tile and one of those plastic shower curtains that never quite reaches the floor. The bedroom was on the left side of the main room. You had to go through this short hallway to get to it, which was odd. It was more of a passage than a hallway, only about 3 or 4 feet long and maybe as wide as a closet. The bedroom itself was completely windowless. Just 4 plain beige walls, a bed, a small desk, and a narrow built-in closet with a sliding door. It felt heavy in there. I don't know how else to describe it. The air felt still, like no one had breathed in there in years. From the moment I stepped in, I didn't like it. Something about that bedroom didn't sit right with me. I didn't say anything at the time. I just wanted to get the move over with. But when my parents left and I was finally alone, I kept coming back to that feeling. There wasn't anything obviously wrong with it. The furniture was fine. The mattress didn't smell. The lights worked. But it felt wrong. Unsettling. I told myself it was just because there were no windows. Maybe it was messing with my sense of time and space. I ended up sleeping in the living room instead. The sofa bed was surprisingly comfortable, and I liked that I could hear the cars outside and see a bit of light through the narrow windows up near the ceiling. The bedroom door stayed shut almost all summer. I kept my clothes in there and used the closet a bit, but I avoided spending any real time in that room. Every time I passed by it or had to open the door, I got this quiet, creeping sense that something was off. Not in a haunted or dramatic kind of way, just this steady, prickling discomfort, like being watched from behind. The longer I stayed there, the worse that feeling got. I never saw anything, never heard a noise, but I constantly had that sense that I wasn't alone when I was in the apartment, especially when I was sitting in the main room. I'd be watching TV or playing video games, and I'd feel it, that cold pressure of attention, like someone was standing just inside the doorway to the bedroom, staring. Every once in a while, I'd snap my head around, expecting to catch something out of the corner of my eye. But the door was always closed, and I was always alone. At one point, I started closing the bedroom door all the time, even when I needed something from inside. I'd open it just enough to grab what I needed, then shut it again as quickly as possible. I even tried keeping it locked from the outside with one of those over-the-doorknob childproof covers. That didn't help either. Nothing changed the feeling that someone, or something, was in there, just on the other side of the wall, waiting. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. It felt dumb. I wasn't some superstitious person. I didn't believe in ghosts or any of that crap. And I didn't want to get roasted by my friends for getting freaked out by a dark room. But after a while, it started to bother me more than I wanted to admit. I talked about it once at a party. A few people laughed and told me to stop watching horror movies. A couple others started spinning ridiculous ghost stories just to mess with me. I shut up about it after that. I figured I just had to wait out the summer, finish the class I was taking, and then move out. It wasn't like I spent that much time at home anyway. Most nights I was either at the library, hanging with friends, or crashing on someone else's couch. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that my mind was just playing tricks on me because the room was creepy and I was tired. Eventually, the semester ended, I packed up my stuff, and I left that apartment without a second thought. I didn't tell the landlord anything, didn't mention the feeling. I just handed over the keys and moved on. Life went on, as it does. I graduated, started working, drifted away from a lot of my college friends. I didn't really think about that summer again until 2 years ago. Out of nowhere, I got a text from an old college buddy. We hadn't talked in a while, and I figured he just wanted to catch up or something. But instead, the message was this. Hey Lord Panda, was XXXX the door number you lived at in that creepy basement back in uni? I replied, yeah, why? A few seconds later, he sent me a picture. It was a scan from an old local newspaper, one of those grainy black and white obituary pages. In the center was a photo of a young woman. She looked like she was in her early 20s, maybe a student like me, smiling, hair pulled back. Below her photo was a short blurb, her name, age, cause of death, suicide by hanging. The date was from 2009. Next to that was a photo of the front door to the apartment I had lived in. Same number, same cracked paint on the doorframe, same little white mailbox hanging slightly crooked. She had died in that bedroom, hung herself in the closet. I sat there staring at the screen for a long time. My stomach twisted into this heavy knot. I wasn't surprised, exactly. It felt more like something sliding into place. That awful feeling I'd had all summer. The sense of being watched, the unease whenever I walked past the bedroom door. It made a horrible kind of sense now. The room didn't feel wrong because it was haunted. It felt wrong because something awful had happened in there. A real person had died in that space. She'd lived in that room, slept in that bed, and one day she went into that narrow little closet and tied something around her neck and stepped off whatever she had been standing on. And then the world just kept going. It's not like I think she was still there, or that her spirit was watching me or anything like that. I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe in the way a place holds on to things. Emotions, pain, fear. The kind of silence that builds up when something horrible happens and no one talks about it. That room had soaked it all in. It was still there, in the walls, in the air, in the closet with the sliding door that didn't quite shut all the way. I thought back to that summer and how much time I spent avoiding that room, how quickly I would slam the door closed, how I never once felt at peace when I was in that apartment. I realized how lucky I was that I trusted my gut enough to never sleep in that bedroom. I don't know what it would have done to me if I had. Maybe nothing. Maybe a lot. All I know is that something about that space was wrong in a way that I couldn't name at the time, but that I felt down to my bones. I didn't reply to my friend after he sent me that photo. I didn't want to talk about it. I still don't really. I'm not sure why I'm writing this down now. Maybe just to get it out. I moved a lot in my 20s, and I've lived in some weird places, but nothing has ever felt like that basement did. I tried looking up her name once, just to know a little more about her, but I couldn't find anything else. No news articles, no campus memorials, not even a photo that wasn't that same black and white shot from the obituary page. Just a short life, ended quietly in a place no one really wanted to think about. I don't remember what I did the night I saw that photo. Probably had a drink. Probably sat on my couch in silence for a long time. I don't really remember anything except how still everything felt. The same kind of stillness that had filled that bedroom all those years ago. Sometimes I think about how easily we move through places. Rent a room, live in it for a while, leave it behind. But not everything leaves with us. Some things stay. Not ghosts, not spirits. Just the weight of what's happened there. A heaviness in the air. A silence that feels like it's looking at you. That's what I remember most about that place. The silence. The kind that made you hold your breath. The kind that made you look over your shoulder, even when you knew no one was there. I never went back. I don't think I ever will. In 7th grade, I wasn't exactly the most social person. I had a small group of friends I talked to, but I mostly kept to myself. That year was a little strange for me. I had a leg surgery at the beginning of the school year. It wasn't anything too complicated, but it left me on crutches for a while and out of PE for weeks. It made me feel a little left out from everyone else, especially when I had to sit on the bench watching other kids run laps or play games. I remember the feeling of being invisible during lunch when I hobbled to the table with my lunch tray, and no one really looked up. Then there was this boy in my class. I won't use his name here. He had a different kind of medical story. He'd had surgery too, several actually. He told me he had a hole in his spine. I didn't really understand what that meant at the time, but I knew it was serious. We were assigned to sit together in math class, and I guess we bonded over being the two injured kids. When we started talking, I realized he was funnier than I expected, a little sarcastic but smart. And for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I was just dragging through the school day. He'd pass me notes during class, doodle on my worksheets, or mock the teacher's overly dramatic way of explaining things. It started small, but soon we became close. We started hanging out more. At lunch, we'd sit outside on the concrete benches and talk about the weirdest things, TV shows, classmates, what we'd do if we could fly for a day. I remember him telling me stories about his hospital stays. He made them sound like adventures, even when he talked about the pain. I think it helped him cope, turning the worst parts of his life into something he could laugh at. Eventually, I opened up too. I told him things I hadn't told anyone, not even my parents. Things about how scared I'd been before my surgery, how I sometimes felt like I didn't belong anywhere. He didn't make fun of me. He just listened. We did stupid things together, played small pranks on our friends, wrote fake love letters and slipped them into lockers, that kind of stuff. Nothing too serious, just harmless fun. He had this way of making boring days feel like something more. Looking back, I think we needed each other at that time more than either of us realized. But nothing really lasts forever. At the start of 8th grade, he didn't show up for school. At first, I thought maybe he was just sick, or maybe recovering from another surgery. But after a week, I asked one of the teachers, and they said he'd moved to another district. No warning, no goodbye. Just gone. I didn't know how to process it. I waited for a message or a call, something. But nothing came. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Life went on. I made new friends. I focused on school. But there was always this quiet spot inside me where he used to be. I kept a few things that reminded me of him. Notes, small gifts. even a stupid drawing of a dog we once made during class. I shoved them in a drawer and tried not to think about it too much. Time passed. By 10th grade, he was more of a memory than anything else. Something from another time. Someone who used to be real, but now felt far away, like a dream you remember only in pieces. Then, one Saturday morning, something strange happened. I woke up earlier than usual. I didn't have any plans for the day. No homework, no chores waiting. It was one of those mornings where the sky was gray, but not raining, the kind that makes you want to go back to sleep. But for some reason, I couldn't. I had this strange, heavy feeling in my chest. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't fear or excitement, more like urgency. I felt like I had to go outside. It wasn't my routine at all. Normally, I'd sleep in and maybe scroll through my phone for an hour before even thinking of moving. But that day, I got up, got dressed, and walked out of the house without telling anyone. I didn't even grab my phone at first. I just had this strong need to go for a walk. My legs took me to the park near my house. It was about a 10-minute walk. It wasn't empty, but it wasn't busy either. A few kids playing, someone jogging, the usual. And then I saw him. He was standing near the old bench where we used to sit in 7th grade, the one half covered by tree branches. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He was taller, his face a little older, more defined. But the moment our eyes met, I knew. It was him. I couldn't believe it. I walked up to him slowly, like I was afraid he might disappear if I moved too fast. He smiled like he'd been expecting me. No awkwardness. No weird reunion energy. It felt like picking up right where we left off, like those 4 years hadn't passed. We spent hours just walking and talking. We talked about everything, what had happened after he moved, how many surgeries he had to go through, how school was going, what his plans were. He said he was just in the area to help his mom with some errands, paying bills, that kind of stuff. He laughed the same way he used to, that half laugh where he shook his head at the same time. I felt so at ease. It felt right. It felt familiar. At one point, we sat under the tree near the hill. It wasn't planned, but we both ended up there like muscle memory. I felt like I could finally breathe, like something that had been out of place for years finally clicked back into place. When we eventually parted ways, I thought about texting him later, asking for his number or Instagram. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd see him again soon anyway. Maybe I just wanted the moment to last the way it was. The next day was normal for the most part. I didn't go anywhere. Spent most of the day at home, helping with laundry, finishing some assignments. In the evening, around 6 or 7, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't pick it up the first time. When it rang again, I answered. It was his mom. She sounded calm, like someone who had already cried too much and had no more tears left. She told me her son had been in an accident the day before. A bike crash. He was riding his friend's bike, and he collided with a truck. She didn't give too many details. I didn't ask. He'd been in a coma for 3 days. That part didn't make sense to me right away. 3 days. But I saw him yesterday. We talked for hours. We walked in the park. He was fine. He was laughing. But she said it had happened days ago. He never woke up, and he passed away that morning. I stood there in my room, phone pressed to my ear, trying to breathe. Everything felt too still, like the air had been sucked out of the house. I didn't cry right away. I couldn't. My mind was trying to wrap itself around a wall it couldn't climb. Then she told me something else. She said the last thing he did before leaving the house that day, the day of the accident, was search for a book. He'd gone through drawers, shelves, boxes. She asked him what he was looking for, and he told her he needed to find a book he'd borrowed from a friend he hadn't seen in years, a book that belonged to me. That was the last thing he did before walking out the door. After the call ended, I just sat on the floor. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't know what to do. I kept trying to think of some logical explanation. Maybe the coma timeline was wrong. Maybe he woke up for a little while, and they didn't tell anyone. Maybe he came to for a moment and snuck out. But none of it made sense. There were no calls, no messages, no notifications. I hadn't spoken to him in 4 years. No contact at all. And then the day before he dies, I see him. We talk. We laugh. And then he's gone. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. I kept it to myself. Part of me thought maybe I imagined the whole thing. But I didn't. I know what I saw. I know what we talked about. I even remember what he was wearing, a light gray hoodie with blue lettering on the front, jeans with a small tear at the knee. His hair was messy, just like it always was when he didn't care to fix it. I still have that book. He never returned it. I never even remembered I gave it to him until his mom mentioned it. It's a little torn up now, pages yellowing at the edges, but I keep it on my shelf. I don't read it anymore. I don't have to. After that, something in me changed. I stopped trying to figure out why it happened. There's no answer that makes it better. No explanation that will bring him back. But I did make one decision. I don't drive. I can't. I've had chances, family members offering to teach me, friends encouraging me to get a license, but I refuse. The idea of being behind a wheel, being responsible for something that heavy, that fast, it terrifies me. It's not even about the accident anymore. It's about what that moment represents. The last day of someone I cared about. The fragility of it all. Some nights, I still think about that morning walk. Why I went. Why then? Why that place? I don't believe in ghosts or fate or any of that. But I do believe in people. I believe in connection. And I think somehow, some part of him remembered me. Some part of him wanted to return that book, even if he couldn't. Some part of him knew it was time to say goodbye. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a fantasy. It was real. As real as anything I've ever lived through. And maybe that's enough. I had always been a light sleeper, the type of person who tossed and turned for hours before finally drifting off. So falling asleep at around 2 a.m. wasn't unusual for me. The apartment I was living in at the time was a small ground floor unit, tucked in the corner of a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I was used to the silence that filled the space every night. The kind of silence where you could almost hear the soft hum of the world outside, but only if you really focused on it. The apartment complex had multiple units, all opening to the outside, but it was a peaceful place. I liked it that way. That night was like any other. After spending most of the evening in bed trying to sleep, I finally found myself drifting off. The rhythmic sound of the air conditioning, the faint hum of cars passing outside, and the occasional rustling of the leaves in the trees kept me company as I slipped into a restless slumber. It was around 3 a.m. when I was suddenly jolted awake. The sound that woke me up wasn't one of those slow transitions from a dream to reality. It wasn't a soft noise that made its way into my consciousness. It was sharp, violent, a crash, a loud, unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting the floor, followed by the metallic clatter of something scattering. It came from the kitchen. It was so sudden, so out of place in the calm of the night, that I froze for a moment, my heart pounding. The noise had sliced through the silence with brutal force, and I could feel my mind racing to make sense of it. My first thought was that it was my cats. They had a habit of chasing each other through the apartment at night, sometimes knocking things off counters in their play. But then, as I sat up in bed, trying to push the blankets off, I noticed something that immediately threw me off. My cats were still there, huddled together, one on each side of me, pressed against my hip. They weren't playing. They weren't running around. They were terrified. The kind of terrified that I had never seen in them before. Their eyes were wide, their pupils dilated so much that they were nearly black. Their ears were flattened against their heads, their bodies tense as if every muscle was locked in fear. And they weren't even moving. They just stared wide-eyed at the kitchen, their bodies trembling slightly. These were adult cats that had been through more than their fair share of commotion. They'd lived with me in different places, through moves, noise, even large dogs barking in their faces. They weren't jumpy. They didn't get scared easily. But this, whatever it was, it had them completely rattled. That struck me harder than the noise itself. I had never seen them react like this. It wasn't just that they were startled. They were genuinely frightened. And whatever they sensed, I could feel it too, hanging heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. I sat there, trying to calm myself, but the feeling of unease continued to grow. I didn't know what had happened, but something about this didn't sit right. Still, my anger at being woken from a rare, peaceful sleep won out for a moment, and I decided to investigate. I wasn't thinking about safety. I wasn't thinking about anything other than the fact that something had caused a ruckus in my kitchen, and I was going to find out what it was. I swung my legs off the bed, the cold floor against my feet as I stood. I didn't bother to grab anything for protection. I was just in my sleep shorts and a t-shirt, barefoot and unarmed. There was no sense of real danger, but the air around me felt thick, oppressive, like something was lurking just outside my ability to understand it. I didn't know what to expect, but but I didn't expect anything to be out of the ordinary. After all, it was just the kitchen. The short hallway to the kitchen seemed longer than usual as I walked down it. The dark was absolute, the only light coming from the faint moonlight that trickled in through the blinds. My footsteps were almost too loud in the stillness of the apartment, a harsh reminder of how quiet everything usually was at night. The hallway opened into the kitchen, and I flicked on the light. The sudden brightness burned my eyes for a moment, and I squinted, letting my vision adjust. What I saw made my stomach drop. The kitchen was a mess. That was the first thing I registered. But it wasn't just a little mess, it was chaotic. The dish drainer rack that I kept near the sink was thrown across the room, clear to the other side of the kitchen, next to the stove. It had been launched with such force that it had hit the stove, the plastic parts of the rack cracking from the impact. The contents that had been neatly stacked in it before I went to bed, a ceramic bowl, a few pieces of silverware, and a plastic food storage container, were scattered all over the floor. The bowl had shattered into several pieces near the stove. The dish towel I'd laid out for drying had barely made it halfway to the floor, lying directly in the center of the room. The entire scene felt wrong, disordered in a way that didn't make sense. I stood there for a few moments, trying to piece it together. The crash I had heard, it was from the dish drainer being thrown across the kitchen. The force behind it was unreal. I couldn't fathom how it had happened. I didn't understand. My cats had been so terrified, and now I knew why. The mess was too far out of the ordinary. It was as if something had thrown it, like something had deliberately done it. I couldn't explain it. The weight of it was still sinking in. I had heard the crash, the sound of the dish drainer hitting the stove. I could still hear it echoing in my mind. I wasn't angry anymore. I was confused and frightened. I had no idea what had caused it, but something felt wrong. It was too much for my rational mind to process, and yet there it was in front of me, undeniable. I bent down, picked up the dish rack, and set it back on the counter nearest to where I had been standing. I gathered the rest of the broken dishes and placed them inside the dish drainer, trying to calm my breathing, trying to make sense of it all. But there was no explanation, not one that made sense. My mind kept returning to the cats, how they had been so terrified. Something had triggered that. Something had caused them to react like that. And now, here I was, standing in the middle of a broken kitchen, with no real explanation for any of it. I turned off the light, leaving the kitchen behind as I walked back to my bedroom. My cats had calmed down by the time I got back to bed. They were still huddled close to me, but their fur wasn't as puffy, their eyes not as wide. It was as if they had somehow come to terms with whatever had happened, or maybe they had just grown used to it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still there, lingering in the dark corners of the apartment. I eventually fell back to sleep, though it was restless. When I woke up in the morning, it all felt like a strange dream. I convinced myself that it had been nothing more than my mind playing tricks on me in the dark, that I had been half asleep and imagining things. But when I went into the kitchen, there it was. The dish drainer, still sitting exactly where I had left it, with the mess neatly collected inside. The room still felt off. That oppressive weight hadn't lifted. It was hard to describe, but it was like a presence, something that wasn't quite right, hanging in the air. I wanted to forget about it. I wanted to rationalize it away. Maybe it had been a burst of wind. Maybe I had knocked something over in my sleep. But no matter how hard I tried to come up with an explanation, nothing made sense. My mind kept returning to the cats, how they had been so terrified, how I had felt that palpable, cold sense of fear in the air. It was the kind of fear that wasn't tied to any logical explanation, the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. And that's the part that stayed with me, the feeling of malice. The way everything had been so carefully set up, as if someone or something had been deliberate in its actions. It wasn't like a simple mess. It was too precise. The force with which it had happened, the way the dish drainer had flown across the room, the way my cats had reacted. None of it made sense. But I knew one thing for sure. Something had been there, something that had caused all of it. And I wasn't sure if I would ever truly understand what it was. It was 2012 when I first began exploring the coastal range in Oregon. I had been hiking for years, but something about this area, the solitude, the quiet, had drawn me in like nothing else. The more I explored it, the more it became my sanctuary, a place where I could disappear for days without seeing another soul. It was my retreat, my escape from the noise of the world. I spent my days hiking the dense, lush forest, with nothing more than my backpack, a few supplies, and my cell phone, which never really had service anyway. I kept to myself, away from the usual campsites and well-trodden trails. There was something calming about the deep woods, the way the towering trees blocked out the sun and left the ground a soft carpet of moss. I'd often pick a spot to camp far off from the usual paths, somewhere peaceful and secluded, and I'd stay there for as long as I could, sometimes venturing into the nearest town to stock up on food. Looking back, I see how reckless it was, but at the time, it didn't even cross my mind. No GPS, no emergency beacon, just me, my gear, and the trail ahead. It was just how I liked it, simple, raw, and pure. In May of 2013, I was out again, restocking in a small town about 6 miles from my camp. I'd spent the day wandering around, picking up supplies, and maybe grabbing a coffee at a small cafe. The hike back was always the same. The sun would dip behind the hills, and I'd walk through the town, past the houses, and eventually veer off onto the dirt roads that led into the forest. By the time I was on the deer path that I had made my own, it was completely dark, save for the pale light of the moon breaking through the trees. I didn't mind the dark. I was used to it. The trail was narrow, and the trees above me swayed in the wind, making soft, eerie sounds, but that was normal. I kept my pace steady, my boots crunching softly on the path, and my mind wandered. The way the wind carried through the trees was calming, and I found myself thinking about the hike I would take the next day. I had been down this trail 100 times, always alone, always in the same routine. The quiet and stillness were a part of me by now. Then something happened. It was so subtle, at first, that I didn't even notice it. I continued walking for a few more steps, my thoughts still drifting, but something changed. A twinge in the back of my mind, a sudden awareness, like a hand gripping my spine. I couldn't place it at first. I hadn't heard anything out of the ordinary. No rustling in the bushes, no snapping of twigs underfoot. The air was still, too still. It was almost like the forest itself was holding its breath. Then it hit me. It was a feeling, an overwhelming sensation that I wasn't alone. Not just the feeling of being watched, but something more intense. It was like every fiber of my being was suddenly on high alert, every sense screaming at me that there was something behind me. Something wasn't right. I couldn't explain how I knew, but I did. It wasn't a sound or a visual cue. There was no movement, no rustling in the bushes. It was simply the absence of sound that had triggered it, a primal instinct, maybe. I felt it deep in my gut that there was something, someone down that trail. Something watching me. Something aware of me, just out of sight, yet close enough that I could feel it, even though I couldn't see it. I stopped dead in my tracks. I hadn't heard a thing. Not a footstep, not a rustle of leaves, not a single noise. And yet I knew. I knew there was something 30 yards behind me, hidden in the darkness, watching, waiting. I couldn't see anything, not even a shadow in the moonlight, but the feeling was so palpable, so intense, that it froze me to the core. I don't know how long I stood there, but I couldn't shake the sensation. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a deer. It felt more deliberate. Like it was aware of me, and it was toying with me. I know that sounds insane, but that's exactly what it felt like. I felt a coldness settle in the pit of my stomach. Something was wrong, and I couldn't put my finger on it. There was a tension in the air, a charged silence that made every muscle in my body tighten with fear. I forced myself to take a slow breath, trying to calm the rush of panic flooding my mind. I turned around slowly, trying to act normal, like I hadn't just felt the entire forest shift in the blink of an eye. I looked down the trail. Nothing. It was just the trail. The moonlight cast long shadows, but there was nothing there. No shape, no movement. Nothing. But the feeling didn't leave. It clung to me like a second skin, a whisper at the back of my mind that I couldn't escape. I knew it was there, just out of sight, and I knew it knew that I knew. I don't even know how to explain the terror I felt in that moment. It was unlike anything I've ever experienced before or since. I was caught in this weird space between disbelief and instinct, not sure whether to turn and run or stay calm. My logical brain told me that there was nothing, that I was overreacting, but my body was screaming at me to leave, to get away. So I turned and started walking, my pace quickening, my heart pounding. My thoughts were scattered, filled with wild scenarios. What if it was someone out there, some weirdo lurking in the woods, waiting for me to get too comfortable? What if it was something else, some kind of animal, a predator? But my mind kept circling back to the same question. Why hadn't I heard anything? I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I wouldn't be able to keep going. I couldn't afford to be distracted. Every few steps, I could feel it again, the presence close behind me. It was like a heavy weight pressing down on my back, but when I glanced over my shoulder, there was nothing. Nothing at all. Then I heard it, the sound that will forever haunt me. It started as a rushing, swooping sound, like wind moving quickly through the trees. But it wasn't wind. I could feel it. It was the sound of something large, something moving fast, and it was close. Too close. Immediately after that, I heard something scrape across the ground, a terrible, dragging sound, like a rake being dragged across dirt. The noise came from behind me, but it wasn't just a random sound. It was timed, deliberate, like something was following me. The sound came in quick bursts, swoosh, scrape, 4 times in total, each one just a second apart, each one closer than the last. I don't know how I stayed calm. My heart was racing, my adrenaline spiking, but I didn't dare look back. If I looked, I knew I wouldn't be able to keep moving. I would freeze. So I kept walking, faster now, my legs pumping, my breath shallow. I couldn't hear anything else, just the sound of my own footsteps and that scraping, swooping noise behind me. It felt like it was right there, right on my heels, but when I glanced back, nothing. Nothing at all. I kept telling myself to keep going, to make it to camp, to make it back to safety. But the feeling didn't leave. It was like I was being hunted, and every time I thought I was getting away, it was right there, keeping pace with me, stalking me in the darkness. The trail seemed to stretch on forever. My mind raced with every possible scenario, each more terrifying than the last. Was it a person? A bear? A cougar? What if it wasn't either of those and something worse, something I couldn't even begin to understand? I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just kept walking, the feeling never leaving, the sounds never fading. When I finally reached my camp, I didn't even hesitate. I dove straight into my tent, zipped it shut, and collapsed onto the floor. The whole night was a blur. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every little noise outside the tent made my heart jump. I kept imagining that I could hear footsteps around my camp, a scraping sound, like something was still out there waiting. When morning finally came, I packed up as quickly as I could. I didn't even bother making breakfast. I just grabbed my gear, shoved it into my pack, and left. I didn't look back, not once. I didn't go back to that trail again. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened that night. I don't know what was following me, or why I felt so certain that it knew I was there. I don't know why it seemed to be toying with me, keeping its distance, but always there. Maybe it was an animal, or maybe it was something else entirely. I'll never know. But I do know one thing. The forest had changed for me that night. The peace, the solitude I had once cherished, now felt like a trap. There was something out there, something I couldn't see but could feel, and it knew how to make me feel like prey. I haven't gone back to the coastal range since, and I'm not sure I ever will. It was a cold night in late fall when my buddies and I decided to head out on one of our usual late-night adventures. We'd spent most of our high school and college years seeking out the weird, the strange, and the unexplained. We were all from New Jersey, so naturally, we spent plenty of time flipping through books about Weird NJ. Stories about abandoned places, haunted spots, strange encounters, and unexplainable events scattered across the state. A lot of it was probably just folklore, but sometimes there was something about these places that made you question if everything could really be just coincidence. We were a tight-knit group, mostly high school friends, a mix of local kids who just enjoyed exploring. Some of us were skeptical, others were downright spooked by the things we heard. But regardless of what we thought, we all loved getting out and pushing the limits of what was normal. That night, we'd been reading about an old, abandoned oil refinery not too far from our town. From the outside, it didn't seem like much, just a forgotten place left to rot. But the more we read about it, the more intrigued we became. There were rumors that people had seen strange things there. Lights that flickered on and off, odd noises, cars driving through the area when it was supposed to be abandoned. We were skeptical, but like I said, we were always looking for our next adventure. So, we decided to check it out. There were 8 of us that night, 5 guys in one car, 3 in the other. One of my buddies, Mike, was driving his old Chevy Blazer, and I was in a small sedan. It had rained heavily that day, and there were still pockets of water everywhere. The weather was cold, the sky dark, and the air was thick with the smell of wet leaves and mud. The kind of night you wouldn't want to be out in, but it was perfect for us. We got to the site around midnight. The refinery was just outside of town, far enough from civilization that you could feel the isolation the moment you pulled in. There was an old, rusted gate at the entrance, which was wide open, probably just because no one bothered to lock it. As we slowly drove past it, the headlights from Mike's Blazer cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisted metal and broken windows of the abandoned buildings. The place was desolate, just the way we liked it. The road leading up to the main building was pretty rough, with potholes and uneven asphalt. We kept driving until we were maybe 50 feet from the main structure. The refinery had several large, crumbling buildings scattered around. A lot of it was completely overgrown with ivy, weeds, and trees pushing through the cracks in the concrete. We parked the cars and just sat there for a moment, taking in the eerie silence. It was strange how quiet it was. No crickets, no wind, no distant hum of traffic. Just the sound of water dripping from rusted pipes and the occasional creak of the old, decaying buildings. Then I noticed it, a massive puddle, almost like a small lake, covering the road between us and the main building. The water was dark, reflective, and stretched farther than I could see. I didn't think twice about it at first. I wasn't about to drive through that thing in my little sedan. It looked deep, maybe a foot or two. But Mike, of course, wasn't having any of that. He revved the engine of his Blazer, gave us all a cocky grin, and floored it straight into the water. I watched as the headlights of his truck reflected off the surface of the water, his wheels fully submerged. It didn't look good. His truck was getting slower and slower, but somehow Mike made it to the other side. His tires churned the water up like a washing machine, and when he finally made it, he gave us a thumbs up. "No big deal," he yelled out the window. My friends were already calling me names from the back seat. "Come on, you wimp, just do it," they taunted. And of course they were right. I couldn't let Mike show me up. So I took a deep breath, shifted my car into gear, and drove toward the water. The second my car hit the surface, I knew I had made a mistake. The water was deeper than I had anticipated. It covered up my entire wheel, the engine sputtered, and I could feel the car bogging down. My heart started racing. I backed off and gave it another go, flooring the gas pedal this time. The tires spun, the water splashed up around the sides of my car, but somehow, I managed to keep going and made it to the other side. By the time I parked my sedan beside Mike's truck, my hands were shaking. But we all got out, laughing at each other, shaking off the nerves. The whole situation felt a little ridiculous, honestly, but it wasn't the first time we had done something like this. We walked toward the main building, the old refinery looming like a shadow in the distance. We weren't really sure what we were hoping to find. Maybe just some old equipment left behind, some relic of a time long gone, or maybe just a place to say we explored. Either way, it felt exhilarating. I don't know how long we spent exploring. An hour, maybe more. We checked out some of the smaller structures, crumbling office buildings, rusted tanks, old machinery left in the open. But the whole time, something didn't feel right. It was like we were being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, though there was no sign of anyone else. Around 1 a.m., we decided to call it a night. We were about to head back to the cars when we realized something strange. Both our cars, Mike's Blazer and my sedan, had somehow turned around. They were no longer facing the refinery, but facing the road, as if they had been moved. At first, I thought maybe someone had come in while we were inside, moved the cars as a prank. But my keys were in my pocket, and I had no spare set. We checked all around the area, but there was no sign of anyone. No other car tracks, no footsteps, nothing that would explain how our cars had been turned around. I didn't know what to think. I was freaked out, but I didn't want to show it in front of the guys. But then it hit me. When we arrived, that huge puddle of water was there, and now it was gone, completely vanished. The ground was dry, almost as if there had never been any water at all. Mike was the first one to say it. What the hell happened here? But no one could answer. We were all standing there, trying to figure out what was going on, but it didn't make sense. We checked our phones, no signal. We tried to retrace our steps, but everything seemed off. We spent a few more minutes just staring at the cars, trying to come up with some explanation. Maybe we had parked the cars facing the wrong way in the first place, but that didn't explain the water, or how the hell our cars had moved without us hearing anything. We didn't stay much longer after that. The air was thick with unease, and the sense of something not being right pressed down on us. We all piled back into the cars, and I don't think any of us said a word as we drove back through the gate and onto the main road. To this day, we still talk about that night. We still don't know what happened. But the one thing that always sticks with me is that feeling of being watched. The way everything shifted when we weren't paying attention, the puddle, the cars, the silence that fell over us when we tried to make sense of it all. Maybe it was just the strange, unsettling atmosphere of the place messing with our heads. Maybe it was the adrenaline and the dark, empty space that made our minds play tricks. But whatever it was, I've never been able to forget it. It still gives me chills when I think about it. How things just didn't add up, how it felt like something was there that we couldn't see. I don't know if I'll ever go back to that place. And I certainly don't think I'll ever know exactly what happened that night. But it's been over 10 years, and it still feels like something we weren't meant to understand. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence, maybe it wasn't. But the fact that it still sticks with me all these years later says something. I guess some things are better left unexplained. I remember the day clearly, almost too clearly. It was the kind of day you don't think much of at the time, but looking back, I realize it was the last day things were ever normal for me. We had been working on this podcast for a while, investigating paranormal events. My producer, Ben, and I had seen a lot of weird stuff, enough to make you wonder, but never enough to confirm anything. There was always something that made you doubt, a shadow that could be explained by the lighting, a creak in the floorboards that sounded like a ghost, but was probably just the house settling. But this time, we thought we were onto something real, something serious. We were planning to interview a woman, Charlotte, who used to be a nanny, about an incident she'd experienced in the house where she worked. She claimed there were strange occurrences, stuff she couldn't explain. Her story had started out like many others we'd heard. Random noises, things moving on their own, the usual, but something about her seemed different. Her tone, her desperation, it felt genuine. And when we dug deeper, we found a couple of things that made us think she wasn't just some attention seeker. She wasn't the type to exaggerate, and there was some solid evidence. I couldn't ignore that. Ben wasn't so sure. He was a skeptic, the kind of guy who believed in the scientific explanation for everything. If a chair moved across the room, it was because of the floor being uneven or a draft. He wasn't convinced by any of this paranormal talk, and honestly, I wasn't sure either. But I wanted to believe. Maybe it was the mystery of it, or maybe it was the chance to break a story that nobody else had managed to get their hands on. Whatever it was, we were in. So, we set up an interview with Charlotte. She lived alone in a small apartment, not far from the city center. Ben and I arrived early in the afternoon, nerves buzzing in the air. We had our equipment set up and ready to go, microphones, cameras, notepads, the usual. We knocked on her door. Nothing. We knocked again. Still nothing. And then we waited. We stood out there for about 15 minutes, knocking every couple of minutes, calling out her name softly, just in case she couldn't hear us. But there was no response. Ben was already grumbling about the whole thing, saying we should just pack up and go. She's probably not even here. We've been wasting time on this, he muttered, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd come this far. Maybe she just needed a little more time. I don't know what made me notice, but the door wasn't locked. I just caught a glimpse of the lock mechanism, half-turned, and I stepped forward without thinking. Ben noticed it too, and immediately tensed up. "Don't," he said, looking at the door like it was a trap. "We're not breaking in. This is ridiculous." But for some reason, I didn't listen. I was already reaching for the door handle before he could stop me. The door creaked open, and I stepped into the apartment, Ben reluctantly following me in. The apartment was dark. The kind of dark that made everything feel wrong, even in the middle of the day. The curtains were drawn tight, and the air was heavy, almost stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in a while. There was a faint smell, something unpleasant, but I couldn't quite place it. It was like the scent of something old, something that had been left to rot. We took a few steps forward, Ben trailing behind me, his eyes scanning the room. It looked normal at first glance. There were a couple of chairs, a small coffee table, a rug that looked like it had seen better days, but there was something off. The whole place had an empty feel to it, like it hadn't been lived in for a long time. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a shadow, something from the dim lighting, but as I got closer, my heart dropped into my stomach. The The ceiling fan was spinning slowly above us, and hanging from it, like something out of a nightmare, was Charlotte. She had hung herself with an extension cord. Her body was lifeless, swinging gently back and forth with the movement of the fan. There was blood everywhere, on the floor, the walls, splattered in dark, sickening splotches that made it look like someone had taken a brush and painted the place red. My stomach twisted, and I nearly turned around to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. I could feel Ben's shock, but I didn't turn to look at him. My eyes were locked on the scene before me, unable to tear themselves away. Charlotte's body was barely recognizable, her face swollen and twisted. It was obvious that she had been there for a while. Her skin had started to decay, the air heavy with the smell of rot. And then I heard it, the buzzing. At first, it was soft, almost like a hum in the background, but as I stood there, frozen in place, I realized it wasn't just one fly. It was hundreds, maybe more. The room was thick with them, swarming around the body, around the blood, landing on the walls, on the furniture. Every inch of the room felt alive with them, the sound of their wings creating a steady, maddening hum. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to run, but my body refused to listen. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing in tighter and tighter. I didn't even know how long I stood there before Ben finally grabbed me, pulling me away from the scene. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice shaking, but I could barely hear him over the buzzing. I wanted to leave, too. I needed to leave. But my legs wouldn't move, and my head felt too heavy. Ben practically dragged me out of the apartment, slamming the door behind us. We stood in the hallway for a long time, just trying to breathe, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. "We should call the cops," Ben said, finally breaking the silence. I nodded. Yeah, we should. The rest of the day was a blur. We called the police, explained what we had found, and spent hours trying to piece together what had happened. They told us they'd handle everything, but they didn't seem surprised, like they'd seen this before. That was the part that bothered me the most, the fact that it was just another case to them. They told us she'd been dead for at least a few days. No signs of a struggle, no evidence of foul play. But what really got to me was the fact that we were the ones who found her. That her last moments, whatever they were discovered by two strangers who just happened to walk into her apartment. The investigation continued after that, but I couldn't escape the image of Charlotte's body, hanging there, the blood on the walls, the flies buzzing around her. It haunted me. The smell, the way the room felt so wrong. And every night, when I tried to sleep, all I could hear was the buzzing. The sound of those damn flies, like they were still with me. I haven't been able to sleep properly since then. Insomnia crept in, slowly at first, and then all at once. It's been months, and I can't seem to shake the feeling of being watched. The images of that apartment haunt me more than I'd like to admit. The worst part is knowing that I'll never forget what I saw. And the more I try to forget, the more it stays with me. I don't know what happened to Charlotte, and I don't know why she did what she did. The cops couldn't tell us much more than what we already knew. But there's one thing I'm sure of. I will never, ever forget the sound of those flies. I was in my third year of medical school, immersed in the rigorous demands of my OB/GYN rotation. The labor and delivery floor had become a familiar, yet always unpredictable environment. Each day presented new challenges and learning opportunities, but nothing could have prepared me for the events that unfolded during one particular shift. The night before that shift, I experienced a vivid dream. In it, I delivered a baby named Sunny. The name lingered in my mind upon waking, but I dismissed it as a random creation of my subconscious. Little did I know how eerily relevant it would become. The day started like any other. I reviewed patient charts, assisted in routine examinations, and observed the ebb and flow of life entering the world. Midway through my shift, a couple arrived. The woman was in early labor with mild contractions. As part of my assessment, I engaged them in conversation to put them at ease. "Have you chosen a name for your baby?" I inquired with a smile. The husband responded, "Yes, we've decided on Astra." The name struck a chord. Astra, reminiscent of a star, echoed the Sunny from my dream. I noted the coincidence, but quickly refocused on my duties. As labor progressed, the resident physician and I prepared for delivery. The attending physician, the patient's primary OB/GYN, arrived just as the baby's head was crowning. Slightly out of breath, he apologized for his delayed arrival. explaining that his bike ride to the hospital had taken longer than anticipated. Positioning himself at the foot of the delivery bed, the attending prepared to guide the baby into the world. It was then that the resident and I noticed something unusual. Small, fly-like insects were crawling on the back of the attending's head. The resident, attempting to maintain composure, pointed out the insects. "Doctor, there are some bugs on your head," she said softly, reaching to brush them away. He chuckled. "I must have ridden through a swarm on my way here." The delivery proceeded, and the moment the baby emerged, a palpable shift occurred in the room. The initial joy was overshadowed by a collective unease. The newborn exhibited a significant cranial deformity, a pronounced depression on the skull, and an overall smaller head size than typical. Additionally, a large, reddish-purple birthmark covered one side of her face. The atmosphere grew tense. Medical professionals are trained to maintain composure, but the unexpected anomalies left us momentarily speechless. The mother, sensing the change, anxiously asked, "Is everything okay with my baby?" The attending responded with measured calmness. "Your baby has some features that we need to evaluate further. We'll have our pediatric specialists examine her right away." The newborn was promptly taken to the neonatal intensive care unit for assessment. After a series of evaluations, the diagnosis was confirmed: Sturge-Weber syndrome. This rare neurological disorder is characterized by a facial port wine stain, abnormal blood vessels in the brain, and potential eye abnormalities such as glaucoma. Reflecting on the sequence of events, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling. The dream of delivering a baby named Sunny, the parents' choice of the name Astra, the attending's encounter with insects, and the baby's condition, all seemed intertwined in a web of ominous coincidences. As medical professionals, we rely on science and evidence-based practice. Yet, this experience reminded me of the unpredictable and sometimes inexplicable nature of life and medicine. The convergence of these events left an indelible mark on my journey through the medical field, underscoring the profound mysteries that accompany the miracle of birth. I was driving home late one night through a quiet residential neighborhood. The streets were empty, and the only sound was the hum of my car's engine. As I turned onto a familiar street, I noticed a man standing in the middle of the road, waving his arms frantically. His movements were erratic, and he seemed desperate. As I approached, he suddenly jumped in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. The car screeched to a halt just inches from him. He was yelling something, but I couldn't make out the words. I cautiously rolled down the window a crack to hear him better. "Please, you have to help me," he screamed, his eyes wild with fear. I glanced around and saw a woman standing in front of a nearby house, also shouting, though I couldn't discern her words. The situation felt off, and my instincts screamed at me to be cautious. Suddenly, the man ran to my passenger door and tried to open it. Thankfully, it was locked. He then darted around the back of my car, presumably heading for the driver's side. Without hesitation, I floored the accelerator, the tires squealing as I sped away. As I pulled away, I heard a loud thud and glanced in the rearview mirror to see him punching my rear window with such force that I was surprised it didn't shatter. A short distance down the road, I saw another car approaching. I flagged it down and quickly explained what had happened. The driver, alarmed, turned around and left the area as well. I reported the incident to the police, providing as much detail as I could. They assured me they would investigate. The experience left me shaken, a stark reminder of how quickly a seemingly ordinary night can take a terrifying turn. My freshman year of college, I ended up at a small university in the Midwest. I'd grown up on the West Coast, not too far from the ocean, where everything always felt busy and loud, but familiar. Moving to this quiet, tree-covered college town felt like stepping into another world, calmer, quieter, but also lonelier. The winters were sharper, the nights darker, and people tended to keep to themselves more. The campus was small, which helped me ease into things, but I never quite shook the feeling that I was far from home. The only comforting part was that my aunt lived in the same town. She and my mom were sisters, but they hadn't always been close, so we didn't visit much growing up. Still, I knew she existed, and when I got accepted to the university, she reached out and said if I ever needed a break from dorm life, I was always welcome at her place. I took her up on that more than once. She lived in this huge old mansion on the top of a hill, a place that felt like it had been built for someone who wanted to be as far away from everyone else as possible. It was surrounded by woods, no other houses in sight, except for one down the hill about half a mile away. The road leading up was gravel and curved steeply, and every time I drove up it, I felt like I was entering a place that existed outside of regular time. The trees blocked out most of the light, even during the day, and at night the only glow came from the moon or the old lamp post at the end of her long driveway. She and her husband, my uncle, were big into hunting. Their whole family was. The walls of the house were covered in mounted deer heads, antlers, pheasant wings, and framed photos of elk hunting trips in the Rockies. It was a little unsettling at first, especially the way the glass eyes of the animals always seemed to follow you, but I got used to it. One Friday night, about halfway through my first semester, I stayed at her house alone. She and my uncle had gone out of town for a hunting trip with their sons, my cousins, and said I was welcome to house sit if I wanted. I didn't have any plans that weekend. I figured it'd be a good chance to study, sleep in a proper bed, and take a break from dorm food. I brought a backpack with my textbooks, my laptop, and a few clothes, and I planned to crash in the guest bedroom at the end of the hallway upstairs. By the time I got there that evening, the sun was already down. I parked my car out front, used the code to unlock the side door, and carried my stuff inside. The house felt extra quiet with no one in it. Usually, even when my aunt and uncle were home, the place didn't feel loud, but there was always some background sound. Footsteps on the wooden floors, the low rumble of voices, the smell of coffee or something cooking. This time it was just empty. Cold air hit me when I stepped inside, and the stillness made me hesitate for a second before I turned the lights on. I threw my bag on the couch in the living room and headed into the kitchen to heat up some leftover chili my aunt had said she'd leave for me in the fridge. After I ate, I curled up on the big sectional with a blanket and flipped on the TV. I was going through a phase back, then where I was really into investigation discovery and true crime shows. It wasn't the smartest thing to be watching when you're alone in a big, secluded house in the middle of the woods, but for some reason, I found it relaxing. That night I picked an episode of Cold Case Files. The intro music came on, and I tucked the blanket around me tighter. Time went by without me really noticing. I remember the fireplace was on, crackling low, and the only lights on were the TV and the soft lamp in the corner. I checked the clock on my phone. It was just after 9 p.m. The episode was about a woman who disappeared from a gas station late at night, and her body was found weeks later in a remote forest area. The case had gone cold for 10 years before DNA linked it to a truck driver who passed through town often. Right when the narrator was describing the discovery of her body, I heard it. A pounding sound. Not a knock. Not tapping. A hard, angry, loud pounding, echoing through the house like someone was using their fist to demand entry. It was coming from the front door. I froze. For a second, I didn't even process what it was. The sound cut through the quiet so suddenly that my body reacted before my mind did. My chest tightened, and I sat up straight, heart pounding. The house had thick walls and heavy wooden doors, so the fact that I heard it so clearly meant whoever it was had hit it hard, really hard. I didn't get up right away. I just stared toward the front hallway, trying to hear if there would be another knock, or if it had just been some kind of fluke. Maybe a branch fell. Maybe something hit the porch. But then it came again, 3 heavy bangs, spaced out, like whoever was out there was giving me time to get scared. I'm a girl alone, in a huge isolated house in the woods. Of course I was scared. I grabbed my phone and bolted up the stairs, skipping 2 steps at a time. I didn't look out any windows, didn't try to see who it was. I just ran. I made it into my aunt's master bedroom and locked the door behind me, then rushed into the bathroom and straight into the walk-in closet. The closet was huge, more like a small room than a regular closet. It wrapped around the bathroom, and there was a small vanity with a mirror, shelves full of sweaters, and racks of hunting jackets and camo gear. At the far end, past some luggage bags and boots, was a tall gun cabinet. It wasn't locked. I didn't even question it. My hands were shaking as I opened the cabinet and pulled out one of the shotguns. I didn't know much about guns, but I'd been to a range once with my uncle and cousins, and I remembered the basics. I found the box of shells, loaded the gun with trembling fingers, and sat down in the corner of the closet, facing the mirror on the vanity. The mirror was angled in just the right way that I could see the bathroom door behind me. I figured if someone got in, I'd at least have a second to react. My heart was thudding so loudly in my ears I could barely hear anything else. Every creak of the house, every shift of wood, felt like footsteps. I sat there and texted everyone I could think of. My aunt. No answer. My uncle. Nothing. I tried both of my cousins. One of them had his phone off. The other didn't answer at first. I kept trying over and over until finally I got a text back. "What's wrong?" I typed as fast as I could, explaining that someone had just banged on the front door like they were trying to break it down. I told him I was alone, that I was hiding with a gun in the closet. It took him a minute to reply, and when he did, he said he was going to call his friend, who lived nearby, to drive over and check things out. I didn't move from the corner. I sat there with the shotgun across my lap, breathing hard, trying to keep my hands from shaking too much. I don't know how long I waited, probably around 5 or 6 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. Every second stretched. I kept picturing someone breaking a window, slipping in through the back door, walking up the stairs, and heading straight for me. I kept hearing that pounding in my head. Finally, I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. A car. Not loud, not speeding, just normal. I held my breath, trying to listen. A car door opened. Then silence. No more pounding, no shouting, no breaking glass. Nothing. A couple minutes later, I got a call. It was my cousin's friend. He said everything looked fine. No one was outside, no signs of anyone hanging around the house. But he did say something had been left at the front door. A package. FedEx. I didn't say anything for a second. I was still gripping the shotgun. My brain couldn't quite catch up with what he said. FedEx. A delivery. At 9 p.m. On a Friday. In the middle of the woods. Why the hell would a delivery guy bang like that? He said the package was small, something from Amazon, addressed to my aunt. He said maybe the guy didn't want to leave it out in case of animals or weather. Maybe he was just trying to get someone to answer. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there for a while longer before finally standing up and putting the gun back. My legs were weak, like I'd just run a mile. I locked every single window and door in the house after that. Double-checked the garage. Turned on every outside light. I didn't sleep much that night. I stayed on the couch with the TV on, volume low, the shotgun on the coffee table in front of me. My cousin texted me a little later saying if I wanted, I could come stay at his place, but I said I was fine. I think I needed to prove to myself that I could handle it. The next morning, everything looked totally normal. The woods were quiet, the sky was clear. The package was still there, leaning against the doorframe. It had my aunt's name on it, just like the guy said. I picked it up and stared at it for a while. Just a regular cardboard box, maybe 10 by 8 inches, with a smiley Amazon arrow and a printed label. I opened it and saw some kitchen stuff, nothing valuable or personal. Just some stainless steel mixing bowls and a whisk set. Something she must have ordered and forgotten about. But still, I kept thinking about the way that pounding had sounded. Not a polite knock. Not even just firm. It had been angry, like someone trying to break in or scare me. I checked the delivery status online. It had been marked delivered at 9:03 p.m. That lined up almost exactly with when I heard the noise. I even looked up if FedEx delivers that late and found out that in some rural areas, especially during busy seasons, they'll drop off packages as late as 9 p.m. I guess it wasn't totally out of the question. Still, something about the way that guy hit the door didn't feel right. It didn't feel normal. Even if you were in a rush or frustrated or cold, why bang like that? I told my aunt and uncle about it when they got back. They laughed a little, said the guy was probably just tired or having a bad day. My uncle said next time to keep the shotgun closer. But I could tell my aunt didn't think it was funny. She looked at the door, ran her fingers along the frame, and didn't say much.